Chapter 1449. He felt that the heaven and earth merit was a hot potato. Of course, it was not because it was extremely precious, but because he felt that many people would be interested in it and it would bring him a lot of trouble. It was because the heaven and earth merit had not appeared for so many years and had never been obtained by an ordinary cultivator. This obviously meant that there was an extremely deep secret in the heaven and earth merit. This deep secret involved the entire world, the entire universe, and all the cultivators and powerhouses from ancient times to the present. In a world with sages, such a secret was most likely related to the sages. In other words, it was very likely that the sages did not want the heaven and earth merit to appear in the world. Under such circumstances, it could be said that the sages were very likely to stand opposite the sages after he obtained the heaven and earth merit. How could he not feel that the heaven and earth merit was a hot potato? Although he did not think that the sages in this world were real sages. However, regardless of whether they were real sages or not, judging from the powerful aura that filled the entire world, the power of his magical powers and his strength could not be compared to the current Luo Fan. It would be a great pressure for anyone to stand opposite someone that they could not compare to. Of course, although he felt that the heaven and earth merit was a hot potato, Luo Fan obviously would not give it away just like that. However, after a moment of vigilance, he put away the merit seal in his hand and said, "I didn't expect the heaven and earth merit to have such a secret. It seems that my luck is quite good." It was unknown whether Yong Shozi could not see the hidden danger behind it or he was pretending not to see it. However, he nodded with an envious look and said, "That's right. After obtaining the heaven and earth merit, there will no longer be any problem with your current identity. Regardless of which cultivator it is, they will no longer be able to criticize you as a guest from a foreign land." Luo Fan said with a smile, "There's nothing to criticize about the identity of a guest from a foreign region. An existence that can grow to the false sage level will definitely not be as shallow as ordinary living beings. They will definitely have an understanding of the fact that there are many worlds beyond the heaven and earth. My identity should be very ordinary." Master Yong Shou shook his head and said, "Fellow Taoist, you are mistaken. Even though we know of the existence of other worlds, for us the other worlds are all comparatively lower-level worlds. For ordinary cultivators, they are foreign visitors. It was just like how a rich superpower looked at a visitor from a poor country. They would definitely look down on him. If it weren't for the heaven and earth merit, I'm afraid fellow Taoist would have fallen to such a state. However, things were different now. Now, with the existence of heaven and earth merit, not only would no one dare to criticize you, but you would also be able to do so. It's even to the extent that most cultivators won't be able to tell that you're a foreigner." When Luo Fan heard this, he suddenly understood. With the status of this world, this kind of mentality was quite normal. After all, this world was a world with sages. As a world that could nurture countless pseudo-sage cultivators. Its level was many times higher than that of an ordinary vast thousand world. As such, among the worlds that this world came into contact with, all of them were worlds that were a level lower than this world. For the living beings in this world, they felt that this world was obviously the highest and most powerful world among all worlds. If this was in the secular world, it would be equivalent to this world being a superpower that was far more powerful than all other countries, and all the other worlds, except for this one, were all impoverished countries struggling to feed themselves. With such a comparison, one could see the mentality of the cultivators in this world. Their confidence, their pride, their discrimination against the living beings of other worlds, and their wariness towards the living beings from other worlds were obviously reasonable. "I see, I was indeed wrong," Luo Fan sighed. Next, he changed the topic and began to ask Yong Shozi about the various situations in this world. Before knowing how powerful Luo Fan was, Yong Shozi would definitely not answer Luo Fan's questions honestly. He would definitely trade with Luo Fan. If Yong Shozi answered a question, he would definitely ask Luo Fan to answer a question about the foreign world. However, after witnessing Luo Fan's strength and sensing that Luo Fan could destroy him, the surrounding starry sky, and the surrounding universe at any time, how would he dare to do so? At this moment, he could not wait to answer Luo Fan's questions and send Luo Fan away. How would he dare to talk nonsense? Hence, although he appeared calm and seemed to be on equal footing with Luo Fan, he answered all of Luo Fan's questions without holding back. However, when it came to Luo Fan's questions, he answered everything he knew without reserve. As for his own questions, he only asked them carefully when Luo Fan seemed to be in a good mood to talk about them. He did not dare to ask too many questions about Luo Fan's answers. It was as if he could read Luo Fan's minds. He would only nod to indicate that he understood what Luo Fan meant. This unequal exchange lasted for more than 10 days before it stopped. At this point, Luo Fan had a much deeper understanding of this world than before. He also had a relatively complete grasp of the various situations in this world. The living beings in this world called this world the central main world. This was because in the eyes of the living beings in this world was the center of countless worlds and the most powerful existence among them. There were sages in this central main world. This was exactly what Luo Fan had sensed. However, what surprised Luo Fan was that there were relatively few sages in this world. There were only 3 sages in this world. These 3 sages were also known as the 3 ancestors by all living beings in this world. They were the Tao ancestor and the demon ancestor. The Buddha ancestor. All the cultivation systems in this entire world came from the 3 of them. It was the 3 of them who had created the 3 major cultivation systems of this world. It was the 3 of them who had created the 3 major cultivation systems of this world. They had transformed this world from a primitive, wild world into a powerful world with an extremely prosperous cultivation civilization. It had become such a vast and powerful world that had given birth to an unknown number of level 9 false sages. The Tao, demon, and Buddha ancestors were both enemies and friends. There seemed to be conflicts and disputes between them. However, they also seemed to support and depend on each other. It was an extremely special and complicated relationship. The 3 ancestors also lived in this world like the sages of the demon world. If one looked up at the sky from the surface of any planet, they would be able to see that in the center of the stars, there were 3 stars that were brighter than all the other stars. That was where the 3 ancestors lived. However, although the 3 planets could be seen from the surface of any planet, before the summoning of the 3 ancestors, no living beings, not even the most powerful venerables or the disciples of the 3 ancestors, had ever taken the initiative to go to the 3 planets. Just like that, those 3 planets seemed to be in a different space-time, another world. Each of the 3 patriarchs had countless disciples, and the weakest of them all of them were at the pseudo-saint level. The strongest among them had even reached the level of a supremacy. However, the number of disciples who had obtained the inheritance of the 3 ancestors was unimaginably high. At least, this was beyond Luo Fan's imagination. Although there were 54 sages in the realm of devils, Luo Fan had only seen 1 disciple, Nan Zun, after entering the realm of devils for millions of years. According to Nan Zun, Taoist de Shui only had less than 10 disciples, which was similar to the number of disciples under the other sages. In this way, the number of disciples of the sages in the entire realm of devils was only slightly more than 500. Compared to the vast and boundless realm of devils, this number was extremely low. However, what was different from the realm of devils was that although there were only 3 sages in the central main world, the number of direct disciples of the sages numbered in the hundreds of thousands. If the disciples of the direct disciples of the sages were included, the number would probably increase by 100 times, reaching a terrifying level of tens of millions. Each of these direct disciples of the sages were scattered in a certain area of the universe, and each of them controlled all the stars within an unknown number of light years. It could be said that the entire universe was actually completely in the hands of the direct disciples of the sages. Just like in this universe where Luo Fan was located, there were hundreds of thousands of life planets within a radius of several 100 million light years. In fact, they were controlled by a level 8 pseudo-sage direct disciple of the Gautama Buddha. Similar to Yong Shou-zi, the direct disciple of the Gautama Buddha had also merged with the universe within a radius of hundreds of millions of light years and could mobilize the power of this universe. Although he was a level 8 pseudo-sage, the power he could display was definitely not any weaker than that of a supremacy, which was a level 9 pseudo-sage with a holy decree. Each of the hundreds of thousands of direct disciples controlled the universe within a radius of hundreds of millions of light years. This was enough to show how vast this world was. I didn't expect the sages of this universe to have so many disciples. But this is normal. After all, there were only 3 sages, and the battle between them was easier to control and balance. The intensity of the battle would definitely be restrained. In this way, the chances of the disciples they had accepted from ancient times to the present would definitely be relatively small. With the accumulation of days and nights, it's very normal for them to have so many direct disciples, Luo Fan thought to himself, and the shock in his heart gradually faded with this thought. Apart from the most crucial information about the sages, Yong Shou-zi also told him many things about this world. For example, there were places that were forbidden areas in this world that no one could leave unscathed after entering. Another example was the location that was a dangerous place and what kind of dangers there were. Another example was the location that had things that were beneficial to cultivators, and so on and so forth. There were so many that Luo Fan's horizons were really widened, and he suddenly felt like he was gradually integrating into this world. This world is not inferior to the demon realm at all. However, why is there no news about this world in the Earth's universe? Why is there only news about the demon realm? After familiarizing himself with this world, Luo Fan was puzzled. In the Earth's universe, he had heard news about the demon realm from many places, and he had even come into contact with traces of the invasion of the demon realm's level 9 pseudo-sages. However, he had never heard of this central main world. It was as if this central main world did not exist at all. This situation was rather strange. It was extremely strange, difficult for one to understand, and even more unimaginable. Perhaps this has something to do with the abnormality of the merits of the universe? A thought suddenly popped into his mind. It was very natural for such a thought to appear. There was no news about this world in the Earth's universe, and this was an abnormality. The fact that the merits of the universe could not descend from this world was another abnormality. It was natural for these two abnormalities to be linked together. As he thought of this, Luo Fan's feeling that the merits of the universe were a hot potato became even more intense. However, at the same time, his curiosity about the merits of the universe grew stronger. Let me see what abnormalities there are in the merits of the universe. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan bid farewell to Yong Shou-zi and left. Yong Shou-zi had been suppressed by Luo Fan, who was so powerful that he could easily crush him, for such a long time that he had been desperately hoping for Luo Fan to leave. Now that he heard Luo Fan leave, he did not even bother to ask him to stay. He didn't even bother to ask Luo Fan to stay. Instead, he eagerly sent Luo Fan off his planet. In the end, he even personally gave Luo Fan a rule that didn't exist in this world as a gift. This law was something that Master Eternal Longevity had obtained by chance when he had sensed the outer realms in the past. It was a strange law of the outer realms. The power of this rule was not very strong. However, it represented a completely different kind of wonder from this world. For cultivators who were born and raised in this world, it could be a great revelation. It could give any cultivator who obtained this rule a brand new inspiration, allowing their cultivation to improve unexpectedly. However, This rule was useless to Luo Fan. It was of little value. Luo Fan had passed through tens of millions of worlds, and the various strange laws and principles he had seen were truly innumerable. Even though the strange laws of the outer realm before him possessed some special and miraculous effects, it was merely a novelty to him. If he wanted to find similar laws, then he could casually recall and search through his memories, and he would naturally be able to find thousands of them. Therefore, Luo Fan only smiled at this rule, put it away indifferently, and turned to leave Yong Shouzi's planet. After Luo Fan put away the rule and left, Yong Shouzi looked relaxed. "I've finally sent off this plague. I hope no one found out that the merit of the universe stopped at my planet," he muttered. How could any cultivator who could cultivate to the pseudo-sage level be stupid? The moment Luo Fan heard the abnormality of the merit of the universe, he could guess that there was a deep secret behind it, and that it was extremely troublesome. Yong Shouzi was born and raised in this world, and had been pondering this for hundreds of millions of years. How could he not have noticed this? The reason why he had displayed such indifference earlier, as if he had not noticed anything unusual at all, was merely an act to avoid having anything to do with the karma of the heavens and earth. Karma was something that existed in every world and every heaven and earth. The only difference was in the strength and importance of the karma. If Yong Shouzi showed doubt about the merit of the universe, it would naturally cause a change in karmic connections, and traces would naturally be left behind. If an expert came to investigate in the future, they would definitely trace it back to him. To avoid this, he could only do his best to pretend that he did not notice anything, and do his best to pretend that he was extremely envious of the merit of the universe. Although this method was very likely to be useless, it was, after all, the best solution he could think of. No matter how Yong Shouzi thought about it, he was still worried and could only mutter, "I've really suffered a huge loss this time." Then, spiritual light began to radiate from his body, and gradually spread to the entire planet and the surrounding void of the universe. Under the shroud of this spiritual light, the planet and the void of the universe seemed to be gradually isolated from the outside world, and a kind of independence was gradually emitted from it. The spiritual light became stronger, more condensed, and more dazzling. In the process of constantly emitting this spiritual light, the muscles on Yong Shouzi's face began to tremble, and he seemed to be extremely strained. This process continued without end. Gradually, cold sweat began to appear on Yong Shouzi's body. As a level 3 pseudosage, the strength that he could exert was equivalent to that of a level 8 pseudosage. His body breaking out in cold sweat was simply as unbelievable as an ordinary person suddenly flying in the sky. This process lasted for several hours. When the spiritual light that enveloped the planet and the void of the universe was so strong that it seemed to be solid, and it seemed to have become a real and unbreakable existence, Yong Shouzi suddenly let out a loud roar. Following this roar, the planet and the void of the universe around it shook violently. There was a violent tremor. Amidst this violent tremor, the planet began to gradually fade, and finally disappeared without a trace. At the same time, in a location that was unknown how many billions of light years away from this area, a similar planet slowly appeared from the illusion. At the beginning, it was just a faint shadow. But as time passed, this shadow became stronger and stronger, and more obvious. Finally, the entire shadow completely turned into a real planet. This planet was exactly the planet that Luo Fan had stayed on before. At this moment, Yong Shouzi was on this planet. His face was extremely pale, and the power in his body had already fallen to rock bottom. He felt that even his cultivation realm seemed to be unstable, and there were signs that it was about to degenerate. Clearly, just now, Yong Shouzi had used his own powerful magical ability. He had directly moved his planet and the void of the universe that he was in from its original location. He had directly teleported it to this place that was unknown how many billions of light years away from the original location. This time, it's really a big loss. I didn't expect this transportation magical ability to consume so much power. Yong Shouzi's face was full of regret. What he regretted was, of course, not that he had used a transportation magical ability to move the planet and the void of the universe to this place. Instead, he regretted that he had been meddlesome and invited Luo Fan to his planet back then. If he had known that Luo Fan was so powerful and would receive the merit of the universe, he definitely would not have said a word and allowed Luo Fan to collect information on his planet before leaving on his own. However, things had already been done, and Yong Shouzi did not regret it for long. After sensing that there were no abnormalities after the planet had been teleported to this place, he sealed his cave abode and directly began to cultivate in the cave abode. He wanted to make up for the damage he had suffered from using a transportation magical ability as soon as possible. As for the living beings on this planet suddenly discovering that the starry sky in the sky had suddenly changed, and the cultivators discovering that there were problems with their techniques and magical abilities that used the power of the stars, Yong Shou naturally could not be bothered with these trivial matters. The method that he had chosen to move the planet from its original location was actually not rare in this world. In an ordinary universe, every star was a part of the entire universe's celestial system. The conversion of any star's position would require thorough consideration and many calculations before it could be done. Otherwise, it would very likely cause chaos in the celestial system, resulting in serious consequences. However, in this world, because there were many disciples of the three ancestors who controlled almost every starry sky in the entire universe, the situation was different. The entire celestial system was rather stable because of their suppression. A single change in the position of a star or a small change in the void of the universe would definitely not affect the entire celestial system. In this way, the position of the stars in this world would only be determined by the controller of the planet. As long as the controller was willing and could bear the consequences of doing so, he could place his planet wherever he wanted. Of course, this was only the theoretical basis for moving planets at will. Normally, any cultivator who wanted to move the position of a planet had to consider more things. First of all, he needed to consider the thoughts of the controller of the region where the planet was originally located. Secondly, he needed to consider the thoughts of the controller of the region where the planet had been moved. Therefore, normally speaking, if a planet's controller wanted to move the planet's location, they would need to coordinate with many parties and apply for many applications before they could do it. It was not like Yong Shouzi's current carefree and hasty way of doing it. Chapter 1450. After Luo Fan left the planet, he directly came to a cosmic starry sky without any stars. Here, he casually opened up a great thousand world and built a cave mansion that he needed. However, even so, he could still sense Yong Shouzi's behavior after he left. Watermark advertisement test. When he saw Yong Shouzi moving the planet away immediately, he instantly knew Yong Shouzi's mentality, but he secretly found it funny. I didn't expect him to hide it so well. It seems that my vigilance is still not very high, he thought. He put the matter of Yong Shouzi to the back of his mind. After all, he and Yong Shouzi had only met by chance. Now that he had obtained the information he needed from Yong Shouzi, he naturally did not need to care about his own choice. In any case, no matter what Yong Shouzi chose, it would not hurt him. In the sector that he had opened up, Luo Fan took out the merit seal that he had put away previously. This merit seal shone with golden light, and it looked like it naturally had a kind of sacred charm. Although the merit seal was condensed from invisible material merits, after Luo Fan's method, this condensation had the effect of turning nothingness into reality. It made the merit seal seem very real and condensed, as if it was made of real material. Luo Fan constructed the merit seal based on the essence of merit. It was constructed by its essence, so its appearance was not completely determined by Luo Fan. Instead, it was formed under the influence of the essence of merit. Therefore, even Luo Fan was not completely clear about what the merit seal would look like after it was condensed. At this moment, the merit seal lying in Luo Fan's hand was square. Because it was condensed from the merits of heaven and earth, it was squarish in shape, but it seemed to outline a universe on its surface. There were stars on the surface of the merit seal. He flipped the front of the merit seal. There were only two strange words engraved on it. Heaven and earth. These words. They were words that Luo Fan had never seen before. Whether it was the language of the earth universe or the language of the demon realm. Even the words of the primordial world and the Tianyuan world were completely different. However, even if it was different, but from these two words, it could be seen that this type of writing was extremely perfect, mysterious, and complicated. The two words were so complicated that it made Luo Fan's mind go into a mess. Of course, the current Luo Fan was able to see the intent attached to these words with a single glance. But he instantly knew the meaning of these two words. Heaven and earth merit. Looking at the merit seal, Luo Fan suddenly felt an inexplicable excitement in his heart. The merit of heaven and earth in this world was too strange, and it had greatly aroused his curiosity. Under such circumstances, how could he not be excited when he had something that could satisfy his curiosity in his hands? He took a deep breath and slowly pointed at the merit seal. In an instant, the merit seal collapsed, and all the merit of heaven and earth dissipated. It began to look for the target of the merit of heaven and earth and attach itself to it. In other words, it began to attach itself to Luo Fan. The merit of heaven and earth might be a treasure for those cultivators who were interested in the merit path, but for Luo Fan, it was just a shackle. He was not willing to completely integrate the merit of heaven and earth with him. Therefore, at this moment, a shadow walked out of his body and directly integrated with the merit of heaven and earth. It was a shadow, an extremely broken incarnation. It had Luo Fan's aura, but it could completely deceive the heaven and earth, making the heaven and earth think that it was Luo Fan. In this way, Luo Fan did not need to truly integrate with the heaven and earth to be able to completely sense all the changes that would happen after he integrated with the merit of heaven and earth. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt that his relationship with the heaven and earth had undergone a huge change. Vaguely, the heaven and earth gave him the feeling of a mother, as if he was born from the heaven and earth. A kind of inexplicable childish admiration was actually born naturally. Good Lord, luckily I didn't completely integrate with the merit of heaven and earth. Luo Fan could not help but feel extremely lucky at this moment. The merit of heaven and earth was almost a channel that connected him to the heaven and earth. As long as he obtained the merit of heaven and earth, the power of the heaven and earth would naturally descend upon him and begin to change his mind, his thoughts, and his choices. Thus, he naturally developed an inexplicable good impression of the heaven and earth. This method may not have been malicious, but it was clearly contrary to the various things that Luo Fan had persisted in all these years of cultivation. After carefully savoring the various feelings that came from the broken incarnation for a while, Luo Fan began to return to his roots, and began to trace the changes in the merit of heaven and earth. He began to search for the laws that affected the merit of heaven and earth, as well as the great Tao that was connected to them. The reason why this heaven and earth was so secretive and unnoticed by others might be related to the abnormality of the merit of heaven and earth. What Luo Fuan wanted to find now was the source of this abnormality, and the reason that ultimately affected the heaven and earth. Therefore, at this moment, he was paying attention to all the laws, and great Tao that were connected to the merit of heaven and earth. The laws of any world were extremely vast. The great Tao of any world would definitely be extremely profound and indescribably wonderful. As a world that could give birth to saints, this was naturally even more so. Even if Luo Fan was only searching for the laws and laws that were connected to the merit of heaven and earth, even if he was only searching for the great Tao that was related to the merit of heaven and earth, it was still an extremely complicated task that involved all sorts of mysteries and principles. It was truly unfathomable and indescribably complex. In other words, it was almost impossible to obtain any results in a short period of time. Luo Fan's mind soared in the endless laws, and the endless mysteries were directly displayed to him in an extremely direct manner. And the great Tao that was hidden in the unseen world also gradually began to open up a corner to him. As time passed, he was in this process. His understanding of the merit of heaven and earth deepened, and his understanding of the merit of heaven and earth also increased. In the blink of an eye, several years had passed. On this day, he was searching for the laws in the cave abode. Luo Fan, who was searching for the great Tao, suddenly opened his eyes. It was an unbelievable divine light. Evidently, he had made a discovery. Moreover, this discovery was extremely out of his expectations. He almost did not dare to believe what he had discovered. All the merit of heaven and earth in this world has actually been received by some kind of living being. How is this possible? How can there be a living being that can receive all the merit of heaven and earth in a world that can give birth to sages? This was the only thought in Luo Fan's mind. After several years of comprehension, he finally discovered an extremely terrifying fact today. In the depths of the laws, in the depths of the great Tao, there was a strange aura that changed the entire merit of heaven and earth in this world. It caused the birth of the merit of heaven and earth in this world. Subtle changes occurred in the distribution of the merit of heaven and earth, such that the merit of heaven and earth could not ultimately fall into the hands of the person who created the merit of heaven and earth. Instead, they all went around in a circle and flowed to a certain location, and were completely received by some kind of living being. This situation was simply unimaginable. For any world to be perfect and complete, and not to suddenly collapse at any time, the circulation of its various laws must definitely be complete. Naturally, the merit of heaven and earth was no exception. Now, the merit of heaven and earth was actually flowing in a strange and unbalanced way to a fixed location. This situation obviously destroyed the circulation of the laws in this world, and obviously affected the completeness of the great Tao of this world. In this way, this world could actually be so perfect, so powerful, and even give birth to 3 sages. This simply subverted Luo Fan's understanding of the world. How could he remain calm? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, Luo Fan suddenly had a flash of inspiration, and he discovered the source of the problem. Perhaps the problem lies in the fact that this world can give birth to sages. This thought completely suppressed all the doubts that had previously arisen in his mind. Ordinary living beings could not completely receive all the merit of heaven and earth in this world, as he felt at this moment. However, this did not mean that sages could not do it. Sages were omnipotent, omniscient, and great beings that knew everything. Even if the 3 sages in this world were not real sages, but rather sages that had some key differences from real sages, compared to non-sages, the power of their divine sense would not be much weaker than that of real sages. Therefore, it was extremely normal for the sages in this world to be able to do this. All kinds of thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind at this moment, and all kinds of speculations caused his expression to change constantly. Suddenly, a terrifying thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Could it be that the 3 sages in this world are sages who became sages through merit? As soon as this thought appeared, it swelled up crazily. In the end, it completely suppressed all other speculations, and the more he thought about it, the more convinced he was that this guess was the truth. Using this idea to see the abnormality of the merit of heaven and earth in this world, everything could be explained clearly. In the beginning, when this world had just been formed, it had merit of heaven and earth. As long as one contributed to this world, one would be able to receive merit of heaven and earth, and receive the blessing of this world. Whether it was in cultivation or in battle, one would receive a huge blessing, and thus the person who received merit of heaven and earth would become stronger and stronger. However, at some point, some cultivators discovered that after absorbing merit of heaven and earth without limit, their cultivation realm would increase without limit, and finally, they would break through the shackles of cultivators and become sages. After that, after countless killings and fights, there were finally cultivators who gathered endless merit of heaven and earth, broke through their limits, and became sages. They became existences who became sages through merit of heaven and earth. It was even possible that there was more than one person who became sages through merit of heaven and earth. It was possible that the current three ancestors of Tao, Devil, and Buddha had all become sages through merit of heaven and earth at the same time. After that, perhaps to cut off the path of future generations, or perhaps to strengthen themselves, the three ancestors who had become sages through merit of heaven and earth directly controlled the merit of heaven and earth in their hands, so that the merit of heaven and earth that was triggered by anyone would not actually land. Instead, it would flow directly to where the three of them were, and be directly controlled by the three of them. It was also because of this that the situation of the world underwent a tremendous change. From then on, the world was completely different. From then on, no merit of heaven and earth was obtained by cultivators. Thinking from this angle, he suddenly understood why he could obtain the merit of heaven and earth in this world. Perhaps it was because he was an outsider, and the methods he used and the benefits he brought to this world had nothing to do with the three sages. It had no karmic connection with the three sages. Therefore, the merit of heaven and earth that was born would not trigger the methods set up by the three sages. It would not flow to the three sages, but directly to him. As for the reason why other cultivators could not do this, the root cause was that the three sages controlled the merit of heaven and earth in this world. But the direct reason, perhaps it was because all the cultivation methods of the cultivators in this world actually came from the three sages. Even the cultivators who created their own cultivation methods benefited from the cultivation system of this world that the three sages had created. It was also related to the three sages. After thinking about all these, Luo Fan suddenly became more interested in the merit of heaven and earth. He had already thought about using merit of heaven and earth to become a sage before he entered the demon realm and when he was still a sage to be. Back then, he already knew that in theory, using the merit of heaven and earth could indeed allow a cultivator to become a sage. However, a sage who became a sage in this way would be shackled by the merit of heaven and earth. The sage who became a sage would not be free at all. He would only be a false sage who could only live and die with the heaven and earth. Luo Fan had already been extremely disdainful of this method of becoming a sage, let alone now that he had almost found the possibility of transcendence and the hope of transcendence. Naturally, he would not care about this method of becoming a sage. Therefore, Luo Fan was more interested in the merit of heaven and earth now, but it was not because he had discovered that the merit of heaven and earth could really make a person a sage and wanted to become a sage with the help of the merit of heaven and earth. Instead, he finally had a chance to verify his original guess. In the past, his various ideas about becoming a sage through merit of heaven and earth were just guesses. He was still not clear about the specific facts, because he had never seen anyone take this path to become a sage. However, the situation was different now. Now, there were sages in this world, and they were sages who had become sages through merit. This was obviously the existence that he had guessed and expected to become a reality. How could he not care about such an excellent opportunity to verify his original guess? However, why is this heaven and earth so low-key even though there are sages in this world? I actually haven't heard of their existence in the Earth universe or the demon realm. Suddenly, Luo Fan fell into doubt again. Previously, when he had opened up a cave abode here to comprehend the merit of heaven and earth, the most direct way was to find the answer to this question. However, now, he had found something even more incredible, but he had not found the direct reason why he had come here. Life was really unpredictable. He slapped his hand, and the merit of heaven and earth instantly left his broken incarnation. It directly condensed into a merit of heaven and earth seal in his hand, and lay quietly in his hand. Since the merit of heaven and earth was related to sages, even if he wanted to become a sage through merit of heaven and earth, he could not put it at the back of his mind. He had to hide it first and wait for the time to activate it in the future. Moreover, he had no intention of becoming a sage through merit. At this time, of course, he had to separate the connection between the merit of heaven and earth and himself. The moment he turned the merit of heaven and earth into the merit of heaven and earth seal, the various wonderful feelings that were born naturally because of the merit of heaven and earth naturally disappeared. His mind returned to a normal, perfect, and clear state, as if those various thoughts had not happened before. This is the real me. However, if this little bit of merit of heaven and earth can change my mentality like this, then what kind of changes will the boundless merit of heaven and earth, which can make a cultivator become a sage, have on the mind? How much will the three sages be affected? Now, will they still be able to maintain their original mentality? Luo Fan thought to himself. In his heart, even the idea of becoming a sage through merit of heaven and earth seal as a last resort had completely disappeared. This cave abode was a vast thousand world. It had just been born at this moment, and because of Luo Fan's will, the flow of time in the entire cave abode was no different from the flow of time in the outside world. Therefore, although he had been here for half a year, this vast thousand world was still a barren land without any signs of life. Moreover, because Luo Fan's current worldview had been deeply integrated with everything about him, this made the law of heaven and earth seal a vast thousand world. It was completely in line with the law of heaven and earth seal. It seemed like another law realm. Stay here and see how far you can grow in the future. Looking at such a world, Luo Fan thought on a whim. As he thought about it, he directly lifted his foot and took a light step, directly stepping out of this vast thousand world. Then, he took a few steps and headed towards the center of this world. As a world, even if it was a world shaped like the universe, it must have a center. This center might not be special in itself, but because it had been the center for a long time. Naturally, all kinds of inconceivable changes would occur, and naturally become miraculous beyond imagination. As for the center of this world, Luo Fan already knew where it was through Yong Shozi. At this time, there was no problem at all going there. This world was completely different from the demon realm. In the demon realm, because the 54 sages were fighting fiercely with each other, the 4 continents in the center of this world were in chaos. Therefore, ordinary cultivators would not dare to casually step into the 4 continents unless they had the resolve to submit to a sage. This world was different. Although the 3 sages of this world occasionally had conflicts, they mostly supported each other and depended on each other. Even if they depended on each other and clashed with each other, it was just a small scheme. Real wars almost never happened. As a result, this world appeared to be relatively peaceful. As the center of this world, it also showed a completely different characteristic from the 4 continents of the demon realm. Almost every cultivator yearned for the central region. Even if there was fear, it was only because of inferiority. It was not like in the demon realm, where it was because of fear of war. Although the place where Luo Fan entered the central main world was not at the edge of this world, it was still extremely far from the center of this world. Moreover, Luo Fan was not rushing at full speed, so it would still take him a long time to reach the center of this world. However, Luo Fan was not in a hurry. After all, although he had heard a lot of news from Yong Shozi, he did not really have a direct understanding of this world. He had not really seen this world. Now that he was hurrying along, it gave him a chance to personally experience this world, which had a different kind of charm to it. On this day, Luo Fan left a commercial planet and was about to head toward the planet with the most beautiful scenery in this star field. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked in a certain direction with an inexplicable expression. "You actually found me so quickly. It seems like you guys have been working hard all these years." Just as Luo Fan's expression changed, dozens of level 9 pseudo-sages were carefully digging out a space-time tunnel somewhere in this world. Among these dozens of level 9 pseudo-sages, the ones leading them were the disciples of the Book Supreme and the other Saint Venerables. Since they knew that it was the Book Supreme and the others, their purpose in coming to this world was self-evident. They must be here for Luo Fan. The location of this space-time tunnel was not the location where Luo Fan had opened the space-time tunnel. This was not strange. Back then, Luo Fan had chosen to open the space-time tunnel there by chance. However, it was not the only way to enter this world. In fact, the space-time tunnel that was opened in this world could appear in any location. Chapter 1451. Is this the world? It's extraordinary indeed. There's really a sage. Beside the Book Supreme, a level 9 pseudo-sage said. Watermark advertisement test. Watermark advertisement test. This level 9 pseudo-sage exuded a trace of eternal and indestructible aura. He was a supreme venerable who had already obtained a holy decree. Moreover, there were still 3 such supreme venerables beside the venerable of the book. Senior Life Supreme, this is the world. Luo Zun is hiding there. Please be careful, the Book Supreme said. As a supreme venerable, although he might not be stronger than the Book Supreme and the others, he could be regarded as an existence of the same generation as the holy venerables. Thus, the Book Supreme and the others had to address him as a senior. The Life Supreme smiled and said, although this world is of a high level, it's not a problem for us supreme venerables. In this world, only those sages can absolutely defeat us. Unless Luo Zun escapes, he won't be able to pose a threat to us. Please be careful, Senior Life Supreme. Although Luo Zun's cultivation realm is not high, his comprehension of cultivation is even comparable to that of a cheating master. If Senior Life Supreme is careless, I'm afraid, the Book Supreme hurriedly said. Not only did the Life Supreme not care about this, but the rest of the level 9 pseudo-sages, including the 3 supreme venerables, did not care about what the Book Supreme said. Obviously, to them, the credibility of the Book Supreme's words was a little low. The ideas that they had accumulated over the past billions of years could not convince themselves to believe this. They did not refute it now. They were just giving the Book Supreme and the Holy Venerables some face. They also wanted to use facts to refute this wrong idea when they fought with Luo Fan later. The Book Supreme naturally knew what they were thinking, but he sighed helplessly. At this moment, he suddenly doubted whether it was right to spend a lot of money to invite them to deal with Luo Zun. There should be no problem. Although Luo Zun is powerful, he is only a level 7 pseudo-sage. He's still not strong enough for a supreme venerable. At this time, he could only use this to convince himself. He suppressed the ominous premonition that had appeared in the bottom of his heart. The laws of this world are quite complicated. I'm afraid it will take some time to completely analyze it. Venerable Life seemed to be frowning at this moment. Yes, that's right. I didn't expect this world to need to reanalyze the rules and laws in order to unleash its full potential. It seems we must find a place to settle down as soon as possible. After that, we'll find a chance to subdue Luo Zun, another paragon said. The Supreme Venerable who was addressed as Ancestor said. This was the right thing to do. The Venerable Book wasn't disappointed. He said, I've been here before. However, I have analyzed some of the laws of this world and can set up a formation that fuses with this world. That way, I can isolate all auras and not be detected by anyone. As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped the air. Countless lines appeared in his hand and swam in all directions. The way these lines moved was extremely mysterious and profound. It looked as if there were countless divine dragons swimming in the void. In the end, these countless lines formed a huge spherical region in the void, enveloping this part of the universe. The moment this sphere enveloped the entire void, all the auras of these people were isolated inside the sphere. All the living creatures outside the sphere couldn't sense their existence anymore. Even if they came here and removed the area outside the sphere, they would still feel that this area would be empty, without any living creatures or material existence. After doing all this, the venerable book heaved a sigh of relief. Luckily, it's done smoothly. You've been scared out of your wits by him. Venerable Life sighed at this moment. The venerable book's behavior just now was completely different from the venerable book he knew. This cautious and timid look, and the way he struggled with so many details were like two different people compared to the imposing and magnificent venerable book. This made him secretly disappointed. The venerable book smiled bitterly. There were some things that couldn't be believed unless he saw it with his own eyes. Venerable Life, who hadn't seen Luo Xun's power, believed that Luo Xun could launch such a horrifying attack that they couldn't resist even if they joined forces. This was obviously impossible. Therefore, he didn't say much but just smiled. His behavior made the venerable Life and the others despise him even more. Of course, although they despised him, they naturally couldn't show it on their faces. Since all the auras have been hidden here, why don't we just open a world here to rest? The remnant venerable said at this moment. He couldn't bear to see the others despise his senior brother, whom they respected and loved so much. Venerable Life was about to answer, but his countenance suddenly changed. Almost at the same time, the other three supreme venerables also changed their countenances. After all, the venerable Life and the others weren't as powerful as the three supreme venerables. Only after everyone's countenance changed did they realize that something was wrong, so their countenances also changed. Damn it! How dare you be so arrogant? The venerable Life shouted lightly. His voice was awe-inspiring, and it contained a powerful momentum that could shake any living creature and make them unable to control themselves. At this moment, an axe tore through the air, drawing a mysterious trajectory in the void. In the blink of an eye, the space-time within a radius of hundreds of millions of light-years was turned into a gray mess. Everything within this range, including the rules of law, time, space, and all the substances and energy that existed within it, even the formation that the Book Supreme had set up to isolate all auras, collapsed with a loud bang before the axe arrived. It turned into a chaotic state of absolute chaos. Within the radius of hundreds of millions of light-years, everything was destroyed in the blink of an eye. Only Venerable Life and the others were left with some space-time existences that had not been destroyed. Only then did they have a little bit of support for their existence. The Venerable Life's countenance finally changed at this moment. Could this be Luo Xun's technique? There was a look of disbelief in his eyes. Obviously, he didn't expect Luo Fan's attack to be so explosive and terrifying. In an instant, he raised his hand and pointed, and an ancient tree appeared above his head. This ancient tree was extremely huge and flourishing. After it appeared in the void, its branches and leaves shook slightly, and endless green light gushed out. It directly turned into a ball of light. It completely enveloped the place where they were. The ancient tree contained a hint of eternal, indestructible aura. That was obviously the Venerable Life's holy decree that he had added to it. This ancient tree was a level 9 pseudo-divine treasure. Now that it had added the holy decree, its power had already increased by hundreds or thousands of times. Not to mention that ordinary level 9 pseudo-divine treasures couldn't hurt it. Even the treasures of powerful venerables could only repel it, but couldn't hurt it. They were shrouded by the light emitted by such a powerful treasure. At this moment, even the Book Venerable and the others, who clearly knew how powerful Luo Fan was, unexpectedly felt an indescribable sense of security. It was as if, under the protection of this green brilliance, no power could hurt them or affect them. This green light contained boundless vitality and incomparable order. Within its range, time and space were smoothed out, and the rules and laws were reconstructed. However, the rules and laws that were constructed were a little strange and a little chaotic. Generally, it followed the rules and laws of this world, but there were many details that were similar to the demon realm, and some small details that were similar to other strange vast thousand worlds. This kind of rules and laws was what the Book Supreme had analyzed before. The mysteries of the rules and laws of this world could no longer be used, which greatly weakened his strength here. However, in contrast, the Venerable Life's strength had been greatly improved. After all, the rules and laws that were smoothed out by this green light followed his understanding of the rules and laws to the greatest extent possible. Although they were still in this world, and were still under the control of the great Tao of this world, they still generally belonged to the mysteries of the rules and laws of this world. After all, compared to his shallow analysis of the rules and laws of this world before, it was already countless times better. In the past, he could only exert 10 to 20% of his strength, but at this time, in this place, he could exert at least 80% of his strength. This was already far beyond that of an ordinary level 9 fake saint. It was enough to give the Venerable Life a lot of confidence. At this moment, Luo Fan's axe finally struck the sphere formed by the green light. In an instant, an earth-shattering cracking sound came from it. The axe seemed to contain the power to split the heavens and the earth. The mysteries contained in it were all beyond the understanding of an ordinary level 9 fake saint, and even beyond the scope of the understanding of the most powerful venerables. Although the power of the axe itself was not stronger than the power contained in the green light, the mysteries contained in it instantly assimilated the green light and changed the target of the green light. On the contrary, the power of the axe that turned the green light into the axe was directly guided by the axe, wrapped up and bombarded on the green light. The green light was directly split open, and the green light sphere directly collapsed. The Venerable Life's expression changed greatly at this moment. Not only him, but the expressions of the Book Supreme and the others also changed drastically. How could this be? How could the power of the source tree be taken away by others? The Venerable Life roared. At this moment, the axe had already turned almost all the green light into its own power. The green axe shadow crossed the void and arrived in front of everyone. The axe itself already contained the mysteries of the simple and perfect world that Luo Fan had created in the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. It was not an exaggeration to say that its power could split the heavens and earth. Coupled with the power of the green light, even Luo Fan himself did not know to what extent its power had increased. In an instant, the place where everyone was standing, and even the space-time passage not far behind them, collapsed in an instant. It completely turned into a large area of chaos, and the Book Supreme, the Venerable Life, and the others were instantly engulfed in that chaos. For a moment, they felt that the distance between them and the others had suddenly become extremely far, and they felt that they had become a person facing that terrifying axe alone. Damn it! The Venerable Life roared. He was so angry not only because the current situation was bad, but also because his face had been damaged. It should be known that he was full of confidence just now, and even looked down on Luo Fan. But now, at this moment, Luo Fan's means had made him look bad. It was really a slap to his face. This was simply a humiliation to him. How could he not be angry? While he was roaring angrily, the green light on the ancient tree above his head flashed again. However, this time, the green light did not form a defense. Instead, it turned into a terrifying thunderbolt. Amidst the chaos, it condensed into an equally huge axe. Suddenly, it slashed down at the axe that was breaking through the air. This axe that was condensed from thunderbolts was extremely condensed. It even contained the holy decree that the Venerable Life had obtained, causing the axe to look like a genuine supreme magic treasure that had been passed down from ancient times. Around the axe, countless tiny worlds were opened up from the gray chaos, turning into countless tiny specks of light that twined around the axe. After these forces appeared, they began to frantically absorb the surrounding chaos, causing it to quickly calm down. However, after it calmed down, what appeared was not the original normal void of the universe, but a void. A layer of laws without laws, time, space, matter, and energy. It was an absolute void. This was the void layer of this world, which was also where the mysterious upper layer was. The time, space, matter, energy, and even the layer of laws had all been absorbed by the countless worlds that had just been opened up around the axe. Everything had already disappeared. Under such a change, the people who were originally separated by the gray chaos saw each other again. The people present were at least level 9 pseudosaint. It was extremely easy for them to form their own bodies and form their own spacetime. Even if it was an absolute void, even if there was no space or time, it did not affect them at all. It would not become an obstacle for them, however. At this time, everyone did not pay attention to each other. At this time, they all looked at the two axes that were rapidly approaching. Among them, the one with the most complicated expression was the level 9 pseudosaint under the Holy Venerate, whose magic treasure had been taken away by Luo Fan. Although the axe in his hand was a powerful level 9 pseudosaint treasure that was enough for him to suppress most level 9 pseudosaint in the world, its power did not exceed the scope of a level 9 pseudosaint treasure. Not to mention the treasure of a supreme venerable, it was probably on par with the level 9 pseudosaint treasures of his senior and junior brothers. However, at this moment, even though it was the same magic treasure, he could still clearly sense that his mark was still in the magic treasure. However, the power of this magic treasure was more than 10,000 times stronger than when it was in his hands. In comparison, this magic treasure was only a child's toy in his hands, but in the hands of the Holy Venerate, it was a sharp weapon that could wipe out a country. This huge difference really made him feel ashamed and excited at the same time. The Holy Venerate's magic treasure had a name, the Genesis Tree. Not only did it contain endless vitality, but it could also use vitality to transform into all thunderbolts in the universe. At this moment, the thunderbolt that it had transformed into was obtained by the Holy Venerate after countless billions of years of deduction. It was a kind of thunderbolt that almost surpassed all thunderbolts that he knew. When it turned into a substance, it had the strongest hardness. When it turned into a sharp blade, it had the strongest sharpness that could split everything. At this moment, the thunderbolt collided with the axe. In terms of hardness and sharpness, the two were actually on par. The axe was actually not immediately shattered by the level 9 pseudosaint treasure that had a physical body. An extremely terrifying power erupted from the point of contact between the two. At this moment, there was no sound at all. In the blink of an eye, the absolute chaos within a radius of hundreds of millions of light-years was completely wiped out. This time, it did not completely return to its normal state. Instead, just like when the Thunderbolt axe gave birth to countless worlds, it instantly wiped out all the rules and laws. All time, space, matter, energy, and everything else was completely wiped out. It caused everything within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles to turn into nothingness. Absolute nothingness. The axe that Luo Fan unleashed was not fundamentally based on the power of this level 9 pseudosaint treasure. In fact, this treasure itself was just a carrier that carried his understanding of the creation of heaven and earth, and his axe that was enough to split heaven and earth. The Thunderbolt axe had the strength to resist the axe, but it was not the end of the world for Luo Fan. The axe only shook slightly, and the power produced by the collision with the axe was instantly dispersed by him and directly condensed. It turned into the power of the axe itself. With a slight shake, it had already bypassed the Thunderbolt axe, as if the Thunderbolt axe was an illusory object. With an even faster speed, it fiercely chopped towards the holy venerate and the others. In the process, the holy decree of the holy venerate, it did not have any effect at all. It did not have any effect on the axe at all. At this moment, the eyes of the holy venerate were filled with disbelief. He only muttered, "How is this possible?" Everything that happened in front of him, it had completely subverted his way of thinking. As an ultimate venerable, a great existence who had not succeeded in breaking through to the sage realm but had not died, he had not felt failure for many years. However, at this moment, not only did he fail, but he also had no ability to resist. Like a child in front of an adult, he had failed without any ability to resist at all. Even his strongest technique, his greatest reliance, was as fragile as a piece of paper. This kind of feeling, to him, was unbearable, but it went without saying how hard it was to bear. Damn it! It was not the holy venerate who spoke at this moment. Instead, it was the other three ultimate venerates. At this moment, they did not have any thoughts of belittling the holy venerate, nor could they look down on Luo Fan, who had forced them into such a state. At this moment, there was only one thought in their minds, and that was to survive. Before the terrifying axe descended on their bodies and completely erased them, they had to use enough methods and strength to block this axe. As ultimate venerates, the three of them did not obtain the holy decree through their own efforts to break through to the sage realm. Two of them obtained the holy decree through various means, which was why they became ultimate venerates. The different means of becoming ultimate venerates caused the three of them to have a different degree of control over the holy decree. This difference caused the three of them to attack at different times. The ultimate venerable who had obtained the holy decree through his own power was the first to display his means. As the light shone, a bronze box appeared above his head. The box emitted a trace of eternal and indestructible aura. It was obvious that it had already been imbued with the holy decree. After the box appeared, it suddenly opened and spat out a deep black light. It suddenly wrapped around the axe and pulled it deeper into the box. Unknowingly, the direction of the axe's advance was reversed. Seeing this change, everyone's confidence was greatly boosted. Although the change in the direction of the axe was very small, it was a change after all. As long as there was a change, there was hope. This meant that they were not completely defenseless against the axe. Under the stimulation of this confidence, the remaining two ultimate venerates used the holy decree more smoothly. Almost at the same time, a magic treasure that was imbued with the holy decree appeared above their heads. One of the magic treasures looked like a zither, while the other looked like a long rod. After the two magic treasures appeared, they each emitted an intense light. The holy decree was condensed in the light, and it directly struck the axe. No. This axe will absorb the power of the attack. At this moment, the holy venerable suddenly returned to his senses and roared. This roar caused the expressions of the two ultimate venerates to change drastically. They tried their best to distort the attack that they had just launched. Unfortunately, it was too late. Chapter 1452. The two forces containing holy wills collided with the giant axe. In an instant, the giant axe began to tremble slightly. Watermark advertisement test as the axe trembled. The two waves of power that could destroy the heavens and the earth were not only neutralized, they were even reversed and channeled into the axe, causing the power of the axe to instantly increase by a large margin. After the power of the axe had increased tremendously, the speed at which it was slashing towards the holy venerate became even faster. In an instant, the space that could have been turned into nothingness suddenly shattered, revealing everything that was hidden underneath. The great Tao hidden in the void was revealed in front of everyone at this moment. For ordinary living beings, the great Tao being revealed would naturally be a great opportunity that would make them ecstatic. However, for the level 9 pseudo-sages who could comprehend the great Tao at any time, this would not bring them any joy. Instead, it would make them feel inexplicably terrified. After all, the power of the great Tao was extremely powerful. Even level 9 pseudo-sages could not compare to it in terms of its terrifying power. In particular, the power of the great Tao in a world that could give birth to sages was imaginable. Normally, nothing would happen if one only comprehended the mysteries of the great Tao and touched the great Tao with one's soul. The great Tao would pretend that they did not exist and would not care about them. However, if anyone dared to directly collide with the great path, dared to use their own strength to collide with the great path, then what awaited them would be the terrifying might of the great path. It might be the eruption of the great path, the strongest attack in the world. This level of power, this level of attack. For any cultivator, as long as they were not sages, they would definitely not be able to resist it. Under such circumstances, at this moment, the giant axe directly split open the void. It directly exposed the great Tao and slapped all of them towards the great Tao. This was simply equivalent to directly sending them in front of an extremely terrifying power. It was equivalent to directly letting them feel the unbelievably terrifying power of the great Tao. If there was a 1 in 10,000 chance of surviving the attack of the giant axe, then there was no chance of survival if they directly collided with the great Tao. There was definitely no chance at all. How could the life venerate and the others not be horrified when they discovered this? At this moment, none of them dared to hold anything back. Everyone took out their level 9 pseudo-sage treasures. Extremely intense and colorful treasure lights merged with the Book Supreme's treasures, forming a powerful whole. It produced an unparalleled power that directly severed the connection between the unseen world and the void. This caused their location to instantly return to the void, causing the great path to once again be hidden beneath the void. At this stage, only then did Venerable Sheng and the others heave a sigh of relief. Of course, he did not completely relax. That was because the axe was still flying towards them. All of them were level 9 pseudo-saints, so their thinking speed was so fast that it almost surpassed time itself. In this instant where time could not be divided into specific intervals, all of them communicated with each other. Countless ideas and ideas were constantly exchanged. Countless methods were proposed by them one by one, and then rejected by them one by one. In the end, the method proposed by the Book Supreme was accepted by the most people. In fact, the method proposed by the Book Supreme was not very complicated. All of them released the restrictions on their own level 9 pseudo-saint treasures and infused all the power they could exert into their level 9 pseudo-saint treasures, completely integrating with the Book Supreme's own treasure. This would allow the book-like treasure to instantly integrate all the power of all the treasures to form an even more powerful and unimaginable treasure. Then, he would use the power of a magic treasure to block the axe. Although this method was not very complicated, everyone was the most confident about it. There was no other reason. It was because of this method that they could resist the power of the axe, recreate the void, and hide the great path in the unseen world again. Although this method was not directly targeted at the axe or Luo Xun's attack, it still affected the effect of the attack. Naturally, they had reason to believe that this method was enough to resist the axe. After reaching a consensus in an instant, they began to move. Each of them channeled all of their power into their magic treasures, including the 4 supreme venerables. They also channeled their holy wills into their magic treasures. After such a change, the book-like magic treasure above the book sovereign's head began to flip. As the pages flickered, they completely fused with the magic treasures above everyone's heads. Using a part of the treasure itself as a communication bridge, it could perfectly communicate with the power of all the treasures. Without a part of the treasure, although many treasures could be integrated, it would be impossible to achieve a perfect integration in the end. It would be impossible to perfectly integrate the power of each treasure and integrate them. Thus, when faced with the magic treasure that was suppressing them, not to mention the Book Supreme, even the Life Supreme and the others didn't have any confidence. Although the whole process seemed complicated, It actually happened in such a short time that it was almost indescribable with a specific interval of time. Therefore, in the eyes of the outside world, it seemed that the axe was approaching and instantly smashed the void layer. Then, the treasure light appeared above the heads of the book, Venerable and the others, instantly recreating the void layer. Then, almost at the same time, the book above the book Venerable's head split into many pages and merged with other magic treasures in a flash, forming a more compact and more powerful magic treasure. The speed of the process was beyond imagination. At this stage, the axe was still only halfway through. The Book Supreme had obtained the unreserved support of the other level 9 pseudo-saints and Supreme Venerables, and his heart was filled with indescribable confidence. At this moment, he finally saw the hope of victory for the first time since he entered this world, or rather, he had the confidence to win. He shouted softly and pointed his finger. In the blink of an eye, the numerous level 9 pseudo-saint treasures naturally condensed into a grayish hand in the void, emitting traces of eternity and indestructibility. A huge radiant hand with an indestructible aura appeared. It directly grabbed at the huge axe. The power of this huge hand had reached a level that even the Book Supreme couldn't imagine. The moment the huge hand grabbed at the axe, incomparably complicated rules and laws were naturally born in the surroundings. Countless time, space, matter, and energy were born, and the area within hundreds of millions of light-years, which had turned into absolute nothingness, was restored to a normal time and space. However, this time and space that had been recreated, it was not the original appearance of the void of the universe, but a boundless continent. It even vaguely felt that it was somewhat similar to the demon realm, as if it was constructed with the rules and laws of the demon realm as the foundation. The shape was different from the demon realm, but the essence was the same. With the appearance of this continent, the Book Supreme and the others all felt it at this moment. Ever since they entered this world, they had been suppressed by the world because the analysis of the rules and laws of this world was not strong enough, and they couldn't exert their strength. The feeling of not being able to exert their strength perfectly had completely disappeared. In fact, they even vaguely felt that the power of their divine arts had been greatly strengthened during this process. It actually allowed them to easily unleash the power of their divine art. At the very least, they could unleash the power of their divine arts that was several times stronger than their own strength. This change greatly boosted everyone's confidence in an instant. Perhaps it can really resist Luo Xun's attack. Such a thought appeared in everyone's mind at the same time. The huge hand directly collided with the axe. In an instant, the huge hand clenched slightly, and it was as if it was pinching countless worlds. It gave off a feeling of suppressing, destroying, and seizing everything. Boundless, terrifying power directly acted on the axe, trying to pinch the axe. At this moment, the axe produced a subtle vibration, and many worlds appeared around the axe like ribbons of light. They crazily bombarded the huge hand, and in the instant of bombardment, they exploded with a loud bang, producing an unimaginable power that poured perfectly into the huge hand. The explosive power of these countless worlds was truly earth-shattering. If it was anywhere else, even if it was a great thousand world, it could directly destroy it. But at this moment, when it acted on the giant hand, it only caused a few circles of ripples on the giant hand. It didn't even affect the structure of the giant hand at all, let alone explode the giant hand. However, it was clear that the goal of those worlds was not to blast the huge hand apart. It was just for an opportunity. The moment the circles of ripples appeared on the huge hand, the huge axe trembled slightly, and it had already slashed into the small gaps that were created, deeply stabbing into the palm of the huge hand. This huge hand was, after all, condensed from the power of many magic treasures. No matter how powerful it was, it could not be truly perfect and complete. During this period there were bound to be some gaps. These gaps were so small that they seemed to not exist. Under normal circumstances there would not be any abnormalities, and it would not be so easy to cause any negative effect. However, under the terrifying bombardment, these small gaps that originally existed would naturally become more obvious than brushing against Cinderella, which naturally gave the axe a chance to take advantage of. It was precisely because of this that the axe could directly stab into the palm of the huge hand just now. Damn it! The Book Supreme roared in horror at this instant. The book above his head flipped extremely quickly, and the light in it began to flicker violently. Endless treasure light began to condense crazily from the many level 9 pseudo-sage treasures around them, and poured into the palm. As the treasure light poured in, the palm began to shake rapidly, and a terrifying power began to condense at the place where the axe had slashed in. It was frantically repelling the axe, trying to expel the axe. It was needless to say how powerful this power was. However, it was obvious that Fu Tu wouldn't give up such a huge advantage so easily. In an instant, the axe shook violently, and the power within it surged. Countless divine light poured into the wound, and it exploded crazily, directly eliminating the power that was trying to expel the axe. Then, it began to expand the wound even more as the axe shook. It also contained the concept of splitting heaven and earth. Every time it shook, it was as if it was splitting heaven and earth. That power was terrifying. It had completely dispersed the power of everyone's level 9 pseudo-sage treasures. It directly expanded the wound rapidly. In the end, it slashed through the palm. This palm wasn't just a shape to begin with. It was an extremely perfect whole body that could exert terrifying power. After being slashed, the originally perfect shape of the palm was destroyed. The power that it could exert was directly weakened by more than 100 times. Originally, this palm was somewhat likely to be able to catch the axe. However, after its power was weakened by 100 times, this possibility had completely disappeared. However, the Book Supreme and the others were, after all, extraordinary. After discovering that the palm could not completely grasp the axe, they finally made a prompt decision. In an instant they all roared loudly. Almost without any discussion, each of them instantly unleashed the power that was produced by their treasures and condensed into the palm. It directly caused the palm to explode with a loud bang. Because they were the ones who initiated the explosion, the power of the explosion was within their control. In an instant, all the power directly rushed in the direction of the axe. The axe was originally heading towards the crowd, intending to completely cut them into pieces. However, the focus of its attention was not on the palm. Moreover, the power produced by the explosion of the palm, had already surpassed everything. It had practically surpassed the limit that this world could endure. It was simply unstoppable. Therefore, in an instant, the power had completely engulfed the axe. Amidst the tragic sounds of explosions, the spacetime within a radius of hundreds of millions of light-years was destroyed once again. The huge continent that was originally created by the power of the palm, which looked like the land of the demon realm, completely collapsed in an instant. In the end, it disappeared without a trace, revealing the appearance of the layer of nothingness in this area once again. Moreover, this was because everyone had some scruples in their hearts. They knew that they had to preserve the layer of nothingness. In order to avoid the destruction of the layer of nothingness, they had to be blasted into the unseen world and collide with the great Tao. Otherwise, this kind of impact was enough to rush into the unseen world and directly shake the great Tao. It would even destroy them all. It still won't work. This kind of power can only delay him for a while. We have to retreat first. The Book Supreme said to everyone directly. Although the Life Supreme and the others did not agree with this, their previous experiences made them know that everything that the Book Supreme said was not baseless. Therefore, they did not refute and only nodded their heads. Seeing this, the Book Supreme raised his hand and pointed at the void behind him. In an instant, the giant magic treasure condensed by everyone's level 9 pseudo-sage treasures split off a portion of its power to protect them. It drilled directly into the void, creating a space-time passageway that led to another world. It was a simple thing to use this terrifying power to recreate heaven and earth, and to recreate spacetime. Now that it was used to open a spacetime tunnel, the effect was even more shocking. Almost without the passage of time, it had already opened a tunnel that led directly to the demon realm. After the tunnel was formed, everyone moved to the entrance of the tunnel, in a position where they could drill into it at any time. However, none of them drilled into it at this moment. Although the Book Supreme said that this terrifying power could only slow down the axe and not destroy it completely, it was only his side of the story after all. Before the final result was out, how could they give up? How could they leave before the final result was out? At this moment, outside the protection range of the magic treasures, the result of the terrifying explosive power was already out. Although all the power had not completely dissipated, it had already calmed down a lot, enough for everyone to see the scene within the range of the explosion clearly. It's really undamaged. Instantly, the Life Supreme couldn't help but exclaim. However, he could clearly see that the axe was quietly floating in the middle of the explosion. There were no signs of damage on its body. In fact, it even felt much newer and brighter, as if it had been cleansed. Seeing this, anyone could tell whether the axe was damaged or not. After discovering this, they no longer had any doubts about the Book Supreme's judgment. Making a prompt decision, they all turned around and drilled into the spacetime tunnel behind them. Hurriedly, they left this world like stray dogs, quickly returning to the demon realm. Closely after, a terrifying power erupted from the spacetime tunnel, directly collapsing the tunnel. In an instant, the starving man was restored to its original state of nothingness. As everyone left, the power that was protecting the layer of nothingness naturally disappeared. The explosive power that was calming down in the outside world directly swept through this area, causing this area, which was originally calm because of the power of the magic treasures, to be completely covered by the explosive power at this moment. However, the uniqueness of this place could no longer be seen, making this place seem so similar to everything in the outside world. After all, the explosive power was already an arrow at the end of its flight, and its power was ultimately unable to break through this layer of nothingness. Therefore, it did not break through the barrier between the layer of nothingness and the unseen world like before. It would appear in the unseen world. Then, the great path and the laws of this world took effect at the same time, naturally producing a powerful and unparalleled recovery power. This caused the laws of law, time, space, matter, energy, and other existences that had been erased within a radius of several 100 million light-years to rapidly recover. During the recovery process, the terrifying power generated by the explosion was completely absorbed, causing the area to gradually return to normal. Gradually, the chaos from before became more and more distant. During this process, the axe that had previously crushed the Book Supreme and the others and forced them to flee pathetically was still quietly floating in the void. It allowed the explosive power to wreak havoc in the surroundings, allowed the surrounding spacetime to return to normal, and allowed the laws of law to reconstruct themselves. It was as if it was just a dead object that was not a magic treasure. After a long time, when this area had completely recovered, the void shook, and a three-legged cauldron appeared. It sucked the axe into the cauldron. Then, the three-legged cauldron shook slightly, and once again tore through the void and left. At once, this area was completely restored to its original peaceful state. Only the powerful beings in the vicinity who could sense the terrifying battle left a memory in their hearts, marveling at the fact that such a powerful battle actually existed in this world. In a void that was countless light years away, Luo Fan put away the divine court heaven cauldron, and a look of lingering fear appeared on his face. Fortunately, they were scared out of their wits. Otherwise, I'm afraid we would be in big trouble this time. I didn't expect the Book Supreme and the others to be able to invite so many helpers. At this moment, he was really rejoicing in his heart. In the battle just now, it seemed like he had crushed his opponents in a domineering manner, causing them to use all their means but still be unable to resist. In the end, they could only flee pathetically. However, only he himself knew how lucky he was to be able to achieve such an outcome. He did not control the axe with his own strength, but with the suppressive power of the divine court heaven cauldron. It was this unimaginable suppressive power that directly suppressed everything about the axe, turning the axe into his own strength, and using this method to control the axe. The advantage of this method of control was that he could perfectly control the power of the axe, even allowing the axe to exert a part of the power of the divine court heaven cauldron. However, the disadvantage was that this kind of control was forceful, so there was a possibility that the axe would be out of control under a strong impact. In the previous fierce battle, it was still fine at the beginning. He directly used the power of the magic treasure itself and the power of the divine court heaven cauldron to suppress his opponents, directly dispersing their resistance. However, in the end, especially after the Book Supreme and the others gathered all their strength, he had no choice but to use a large amount of his opponent's strength to attack. In this way, this powerful attack began to shake the suppression of the divine court heaven cauldron, causing the axe to gradually show signs of being out of control, making it more and more difficult for him to control the axe. Chapter 1453. Because of this, he had no choice but to let the axe stay there for such a long time. In the end, he had no choice but to let the divine court heavenly cauldron fly away. Only then did he manage to retrieve the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. Watermark advertisement test. However, after retrieving it, he discovered an unexpected gain. It was the brand that belonged to the original owner of the magic treasure. At this moment it had actually disappeared without a trace. It had been erased by the terrifying impact just now. This unexpected gain made Luo Fan secretly sigh. This magic treasure was really destined to be his. Thinking about it, he casually inserted his mark into the magic treasure. In an instant, the magic treasure became his. As the magic treasure was completely refined by him, it began to emit a strong and unparalleled light. The magic treasure also transmitted an extremely joyful emotion, as if it had finally achieved its wish and dream. "You must have waited for a long time." Luo Fan looked at the magic treasure and said with a smile. As he said this, the magic treasure once again emitted a joyful emotion. As a level 9 pseudo-sage natal magic treasure, as the basis for level 9 pseudo-sage to achieve Tao, level 9 pseudo-sage treasures would definitely give birth to a treasure spirit and obtain spiritual intelligence. However, this was obviously unacceptable to cultivators. As the foundation for achieving Tao, even if the treasure spirit was completely under his control, even if he could completely control everything about the magic treasure, it still had other spiritual intelligence. How could he accept such a situation? Therefore, normally, they would erase the treasure spirit before it gave birth to a treasure spirit, or use their own consciousness to replace the treasure spirit, the axe in front of him. This was the case. Its original treasure spirit had been completely erased, and all that was left was a vague spiritual opportunity. It had no real consciousness, let alone a complete spiritual consciousness. As a result, it did not even have the ability to think properly, not to mention communicating with others. However, although it was only left with spiritual opportunity, it didn't even have the ability to think, but that didn't mean that it didn't know who was best to follow. Previously in the hands of the level 9 pseudo-saint, it was able to unleash the power to destroy the world. But how could it compare to what happened to Luo Fan? It could even easily defeat a Supreme Venerable, so much so that many Supreme Venerables had no choice but to gather all their strength and cooperate with others. Yet, they still couldn't resist it? In comparison, this power was more than 10,000 times stronger than when it was in the hands of the level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator. To a magical treasure spiritium that did not know how to truly think, did not know what loyalty was, and what feelings were. Evidently, an existence that could allow him to unleash power beyond what he should have was much more welcomed as a master than an existence that could only allow him to unleash his normal power. Therefore, at this moment, when Luo Fan poured his imprint into it and directly refined it, it was incomparably welcoming and overjoyed. Feeling such joy, Luo Fan smiled. This was an unexpected gain. He did not need this level 9 pseudo-sage treasure to be his natal magical treasure, nor did he need it to be the foundation of his cultivation. Therefore, he did not need to guard against this magical treasure giving birth to a treasure spirit. On the contrary, after this magical treasure gave birth to a treasure spirit, it would make it easier for him to control it. It would allow him to unleash the power of his divine abilities more perfectly with the help of this magical treasure. At this moment, with a thought, he raised his hand and pointed. In an instant, endless vitality surged out of his body and directly poured into the magical treasure. Once a cultivator became an innate zenith heaven, his body would be self-sufficient, and all of his power would be born naturally in his body. Luo Fan's cultivation realm was already at the level 7 pseudosage, so this ability was naturally more powerful. At this moment, the vitality that poured into the magical treasure from his body was created by him out of thin air. It was completely targeted at the power of spiritual opportunity in the magical treasure. To him, it was just a matter of a thought, but it did not harm him at all. Since he had the intention to help this magic treasure, there was no limit to the vitality that Luo Fan poured into the magic treasure at this time. As long as the magic treasure could absorb it, as long as the spiritual vigor in it needed it, he would pour it in without restraint. From the looks of it, there seemed to be a huge river of vitality constantly pouring into that magical treasure. The entire process was grand and shocking, and it was amazing. This process lasted for a few days. As the vitality poured in, the magical treasure naturally revealed an indescribable joy. This joy was more than 100 times stronger than the joy that Luo Fan revealed when he refined this magical treasure. This was almost inevitable. Compared to changing a master that they liked or evolving themselves, everyone knew which one was more beneficial, and everyone knew which one they would welcome more after a few days. When the vitality that Luo Fan poured in was enough to fill a great 1,000 world and turn a great 1,000 world into a liquefied ocean of vitality, the magical treasure finally emitted an inexplicable feeling of fullness. As this feeling of fullness spread out, the magical treasure's strong desire for vitality suddenly disappeared without a trace. Sensing this change, Luo Fan knew that this was the last moment. With a thought, he raised his hand and cut off the vitality pouring in. After he severed his life force, the axe suddenly broke free from his control and appeared in the void in front of him. It began to float quietly. Although he appeared to be extremely calm as he floated there, as if nothing had happened, it was as if nothing had happened. However, Luo Fan could clearly sense that a strange change was happening inside the magical treasure. An incredible transformation was taking place. This change, this transformation, was the wonderful change of life from nothing to something. It could not be described with words, nor could it be described with feelings. There was only a mysterious charm that made people unable to help but be immersed in it. Naturally, Luo Fan would not be immersed in it. He had done this kind of process too many times. At this moment, although the magical treasure was giving birth to a treasure spirit because it was a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure, the changes were much more mysterious. After all, it was still within the scope of the birth of life, but it was still within Luo Fan's control. In this case, how could he be immersed in it? At this moment, he only had a faint smile on his face. He looked at the axe in front of him quietly. His eyes looked through the surface of the axe and directly saw that the depths of the axe seemed to have turned into a silk cocoon. It was brewing something, waiting for the infinite vitality to break out of the cocoon. This process of waiting lasted for more than 10 days. Finally, at a certain moment, In the void of the universe, an incomparably dark cloud suddenly appeared out of thin air, directly enveloping the area within a radius of several light years. Tribulation? Luo Fan looked at the dark cloud and could not help but feel his heart skip a beat. He had never thought that giving birth to a treasure spirit in a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure would actually lead to a heavenly tribulation. Moreover, it was such a powerful and terrifying heavenly tribulation. At this moment, in the middle of the axe, the silk cocoon formed by vitality had already begun to crack, and an incomparably strong will seeped out from it. This will was filled with joy and curiosity. There was even admiration. It was the treasure spirit that had already taken shape. As the cracks appeared on the silk cocoon, the tribulation clouds that covered the area within a radius of several light years in the void began to churn. Bolts of lightning directly struck down like rain, directly pouring into the magical treasure and rushing towards the silk cocoon. After receiving this stimulation, the will that came from the silk cocoon turned into anger. Then, the magical treasure shook slightly, and an axe light directly shot towards the tribulation clouds above. Looking at the way the axe vibrated and bombarded, it vaguely contained the charm of the axe that Luo Fan had used when fighting the Book Supreme and the others, which seemed to be able to split the heavens and the earth. The mysteriousness and profoundness of it had reached an indescribable level. In an instant, the axe light surged into the tribulation clouds. As the axe light surged into the tribulation clouds that were raining down lightning suddenly collapsed, and all the clouds were instantly dispersed by the axe light. They directly transformed into the countless worlds that had been created by the axe light, and in the end, they completely vanished along with the destruction of the worlds. I didn't expect that it would actually learn it. Luo Fan couldn't help but smile as he watched the changes in the axe. He hadn't expected that just by relying on the axe to fight a few times, the intelligence within the axe had completely memorized his methods of battle. At this moment, after it had evolved into a treasure spirit, its memory had been greatly strengthened to the point that it could directly utilize the power of the axe to execute his techniques. Meanwhile, the cracks on the silk cocoon within the axe had grown larger and larger, and they were becoming more and more obvious. Not only could he faintly sense the powerful will that came from it, but he could also see a tiny figure curled up within the silk cocoon. At this moment, the great Tao of this world trembled slightly, and the layer of laws within an unknown radius of tens of thousands of light years instantly underwent an inexplicable change. During this change, the tribulation clouds were denser than before, and the power contained within them was even more vast. At the same time, the area they covered was more than 10 times smaller than before, and they appeared in the void. All of these changes caused the power of the tribulation clouds to be at least 100 times stronger than before. After the tribulation clouds appeared, they didn't even wait for a moment before countless heavenly flames descended. The power of these heavenly flames was terrifying. If they were placed in any other spacetime, just a little bit would be enough to completely ignite the entire world, and even the entire spacetime. But here, because it came from heaven and earth, and because it was derived from the surrounding layer of laws, its power wasn't scattered. It didn't affect spacetime, and it didn't affect the layer of laws. When it descended from the sky, it didn't cause any damage to the surroundings, and it directly enveloped the axe. Moreover, the heavenly flames were endless. Although one was enough to envelop the axe, the heavenly flames continued to descend continuously, constantly enveloping the axe and burning it in the process. The power of the heavenly flames condensed and erupted at this moment, and the effect was terrifying. It was truly unimaginable. The essence of the axe had been tempered countless times, and after being cleansed by the power of dozens of level 9 pseudo-sage treasures, it had become much stronger, so it wouldn't suffer any damage from the heavenly flames. However, inside the axe was the treasure spirit that was breaking out of the cocoon. Obviously, it didn't have the ability to do so. At this moment it was entangled by the flames. The flames directly penetrated through the cracks of the silk cocoon and began to burn the treasure spirit that was trying hard to be born, causing the treasure spirit to finally let out its first cry. An incomparably mournful cry. Faintly. There were even sizzling sounds coming from within the treasure. It directly entered Luo Fan's ears. Along with the pain, the treasure spirit's struggle became more and more intense. It should have taken a lot of time to break through, but in just a few breaths, it had already been completely shattered. It directly revealed the treasure spirit's appearance. It was a boy that looked like he was 5 or 6 years old. He held a pocket-sized axe in his hand, and his body was surrounded by colorless and transparent terrifying flames that could completely ignite a great thousand world. At this moment, he looked like a god of fire. However, in contrast to this majestic appearance, there was an incomparably mournful cry coming from his mouth. This cry was so strong. It contained the pain of the past, and it was really heartbreaking, and it made those who heard it cry. As the boy screamed, he raised his hand and waved the pocket-sized axe in his hand. This wave of the axe, it contained the essence of the axe that Luo Fan had used to split the heavens and earth. In an instant, it completely swept up all the heavenly fire, directly transforming it into a strange heavenly fire world. It directly appeared in front of the axe, following the direction of the axe. With a tremor, it directly rushed out of the axe and appeared outside the axe. It madly swallowed the endless heavenly fire around it, and in the blink of an eye, it had completely swallowed up the heavenly fire that was wrapped around the axe. It even began to flow upwards and began to swallow the heavenly fire that was being blasted out by the tribulation clouds above. All of the heavenly fire was absorbed into the heavenly fire world, causing the heavenly fire world to grow at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, it expanded 100 times, becoming a vast and boundless great thousand world. It rushed up and directly collided with the tribulation clouds. At this moment, the tribulation clouds in the sky shook violently. An incomparably strong force suddenly burst out, and a terrifying impact directly swept away some of the strange things in the tribulation clouds. In an instant, it completely destroyed the heavenly fire world within the tribulation clouds, which was preparing to madly swallow the power of the tribulation clouds. It also swallowed the heavenly fire within it back into the tribulation clouds, causing the power of the tribulation clouds to greatly increase. Seeing this change, Luo Fan secretly felt that it was a pity. It's a pity that it didn't obtain much of the essence. The world that it opened up is not complete enough, and not strong enough. Otherwise, that move just now would have been enough to completely swallow the tribulation clouds. At this moment, the treasure spirit had completely taken shape. Its body swayed, and the axe itself turned into the appearance of a pocket-sized axe. It stood under the tribulation clouds, raising its head to look at the void that was surging above. There were bursts of intense light shining inside, and it was obvious that the tribulation clouds were brewing a terrifying attack. Although it only had the appearance of a 5 or 6-year-old child, it naturally emitted an aura that was unafraid of all things in the world, unafraid of all harm and all attacks, causing people to unconsciously ignore its appearance and age, only feeling its strength and fearlessness. It roared loudly, and the pocket-sized axe in its hand struck out again. This time, there was no attempt to conceal it. The axe that seemed to be able to split the heavens and the earth was directly revealed. The space and time within a range of tens of thousands of light-years completely collapsed at this moment. Following that, the layer of laws within this range also completely collapsed at the same time, completely turning into a gray haze of chaos. In this chaos, the power of the axe directly pierced through the void, pouring into the tribulation clouds. The power of the tribulation clouds instantly erupted with a loud bang. Endless lightning, flames, boulders, streams of water, and strange trees crazily swarmed out of the tribulation clouds, madly pouring towards the axe light. Although this axe strike of the child had only obtained a portion of the essence of Luo Fan's axe, Its power itself was already enough to destroy the heavens and the earth. Although the tribulation clouds were powerful and came directly from the great Tao of the world, their direct source was still the layer of laws and space and time within a range of tens of thousands of light years. At this moment, everything had already been destroyed and scattered, and the tribulation clouds naturally lost their source of power. Although the power contained within them was still powerful and shocking, it had already run out of energy. However, he was already running out of energy. As long as he could block the first strike, it would only be a matter of time before he could obtain victory. At this very moment, this axe light had clearly blocked the first strike. After an unknown amount of time, at this moment, time had already been split into pieces. The time here was originally chaotic, so naturally, no one knew how long it had been when everything calmed down. The surroundings were clear. The tribulation clouds had completely disappeared. As for the boy, he was completely stunned. As for the child, his entire body was emitting an aura of perfection. Based on this appearance, it was obvious that this magic treasure, this treasure spirit, had already passed this heavenly tribulation. The child waited in the void for a long time, and after discovering that there were no changes, he was finally overjoyed. With a cheer, he came before Luo Fan, knelt before Luo Fan, and said, "Thank you, Master, for bestowing life upon me." Luo Fan smiled slightly. "It was your own hard work that allowed you to achieve what you have today. Do you have a name?" "This lowly one does not have a name. Since you do not have a name, then I will give you a name. The axe you used just now was something I comprehended from the creation of heaven and earth. In that case, you will be called Heaven-Splitting Boy. Your original body will be called Heaven-Splitting Axe," Luo Fan said. When the child heard this, he secretly pondered in his heart, and then was overjoyed, saying, "Heaven-Splitting Boy thanks Master for bestowing a name." Luo Fan smiled slightly, raised his hand, and this heaven-splitting boy directly turned into a heaven-splitting axe, falling directly into his hand. Holding this axe in his hand, Luo Fan felt the changes of this axe. After the birth of the artifact spirit, the spirituality of the axe had increased by many times. He felt that he didn't even need to spend much energy on it. As long as he willed it, it would be able to directly unleash the heaven-splitting axe that he had previously spent a lot of energy to unleash. After such a change, this axe's usefulness to him had increased by 100 times. After weighing the axe slightly, Luo Fan put it away and said to the void, "You have been peeping for so long, why don't you show yourself?" After a while, a sigh of praise resounded from the void, as expected of a powerhouse from the outer realm who was able to start such a battle. "I didn't expect that you would be able to discover me even after I used the profound technique passed down by my master to conceal myself. It's really admirable." This was the voice of a young man. This voice was clear and gentle, but it gave off a feeling of a spring breeze. Just listening to this voice made people have a good impression of this person. Then, a figure gradually appeared in the void, not far in front of Luo Fan. This was a young man wearing a Taoist robe. His face was not handsome, and could only be considered average. However, his face was full of smiles, and it was easy for people to have a good impression of him. This person was a level 9 pseudo-sage. Furthermore, he was not an ordinary level 9 pseudo-sage, but a level 9 pseudo-sage that was extremely close to the venerable realm. A level 9 pseudo-sage in a Taoist robe, and he kept mentioning his master. It was obvious what this person's identity was. Luo Fan smiled and said, "It's my honor to be praised by the Tao Ancestor's disciple. I'm Luo Fan, how should I address you?" The person did not deny that Luo Fan guessed that he was the Tao Ancestor's disciple. He smiled and said, "I'm Hong Huazi, but people call me Hong Zun. I'm the guardian of the area within 300 billion light years. I was alarmed by the movement of your magic treasure, so I took the liberty to come here. I hope fellow Luo Zun can forgive me." This world was quite similar to the demon realm. As for the level 9 pseudo-sage, he did not call him by his name. Luo Fan already knew this. At this moment, he was not surprised by Hong Zun's way of addressing him. He smiled and said, "I didn't know the rules of this world, and recklessly increased the intelligence of my magic treasure, causing such damage to the area controlled by you. I should have made a big mistake. How dare I say I'm sorry? As long as you don't blame me, I'll be satisfied." Luo Fan naturally knew what Hong Zun meant when he said that he was the guardian of this 300 billion light-year range, but he didn't call him a guardian unwittingly. Chapter 1454. As a disciple of the Tao ancestor, Hong Zun was extremely polite to Luo Fan. Although his tone was not servile, he did not have the slightest bit of arrogance as a disciple of a saint. Watermark advertisement test. After some communication, Hong Zun said, "Fellow Taoist, this is your first time in this world. I think you don't have a deep understanding of the customs of this world. I'm afraid you don't know that this world is holding the Three Sects Conference recently. It's a conference that has great opportunities for all cultivators. I wonder if fellow Taoist is interested in participating?" Luo Fan was stunned when he heard that. He could not help but be stunned. This was indeed the first time he had heard of the Three Sects Conference after Hong Zun mentioned it. Before this, he had never heard of such a conference. The Three Sects Conference might have other meanings in other worlds. However, in this world, where there were only 3 saints, and the 3 saints were the Tao ancestor, the demon ancestor, and the Buddha ancestor, the 3 sects could only be disciples of the 3 saints. Three Sects Conference? What kind of conference is this? Luo Fan asked curiously. When Hong Zun heard that, he smiled and said, "The Three Sects Conference is a conference where the disciples of the 3 saints of this world set up an arena to challenge the world. If you can obtain a good ranking in this conference, you will receive a great reward. You might even be taken in as a disciple by a saint." Hearing that, although Luo Fan became more curious about the Three Sects Conference, his anticipation was greatly reduced. To be taken in as a disciple by a saint was a great thing for ordinary cultivators. But to him it was nothing at all. At least, Luo Fan himself did not feel that it was a tempting thing. The saints of this world were most likely fake saints who relied on merit to become saint. As for the pursuit of becoming a true saint, they were truly eternal and indestructible. They would not die even if the world was destroyed, but they would not be destroyed. For Lu Fuan, who had the power of immortality, becoming a disciple of a fake saint was obviously not what he wanted. Therefore, at this time, he did not answer Hong Zun's obvious solicitation. He only smiled and said, "I see. May I know where the Three Sects Conference will be held?" Hearing this, Hong Zun, who was also not muddle-headed, immediately understood something. He said with some regret, "It's in the center of this world. Actually, if you get close to that location, you should be able to get the news." Luo Fan smiled and said, "I see. Then when the time comes, I will go and cheer for you." When Hong Zun heard this, he confirmed his previous guess. The powerful existence in front of him actually did not have much interest in the meeting of the 3 sections. He could not help but sigh and say, "Thank you, fellow Taoist. However, when the time comes, there will definitely be a lot of cultivators participating. I'm afraid you won't be able to find me." Luo Fan smiled. He said nothing more. For the current Luo Fan, as long as he wanted to find it, he could easily find it in this universe or even in other universes, let alone in the same region. Naturally, what Hong Zun said about him not being able to find him did not happen. Although the recruitment failed, Hong Zun only felt pity for a while before he recovered. He continued to chat with Luo Fan for a while. After discussing the Tao for a while, he bid farewell and left. Looking at Hong Zun's disappearing figure, Luo Fan could not help but feel emotional. In this world, The difference between being a disciple of a sage and a disciple of a non-sage was too great. Although he only communicated with Hong Zun for a short time, he felt that he had gained a lot more than when he communicated with Yong Shou for a long time. When he communicated with Yong Shou, he could also gain some gains from time to time and feel that his horizons had broadened. However, the content of what he said was actually something that he could think of after a slight turn. Most of it was even something that he had thoroughly understood before, but it was just taken out from another perspective. However, the short time he had with Hong Zun just now was completely different from the time he had with Yong Shou. Just now, although Hong Zun did not talk about the profound and exquisite mysteries of the Great Tao, just a few words from his perspective and the grandeur revealed had already left a deep impression on Luo Fan. Moreover, the one or two sentences that were said to be from the Tao ancestor made Luo Fan feel an incomparably deep wisdom. It was a kind of sentence that could only be said after almost completely grasping all the truths and mysteries of the Great Tao. From it, there was even a feeling that the more one comprehended, the more mysteries would be revealed, and the more profound the truth of the Great Tao contained in it would be. It was really worthy of the words of a sage. After Hong Zun left, Luo Fan raised his hand and clapped. The heaven-splitting axe directly turned into the appearance of a 5- or 6-year-old boy in front of him. After the heaven-splitting boy came out, he said to Luo Fan, "Master, this person is so weak, why didn't you kill him along the way?" Hearing this, Luo Fan could not help but be slightly stunned. No matter how he thought about it, he could not understand what this person's weakness had to do with killing him. For a moment, Luo Fan could not help but suspect, did I accidentally instill some weird values into him? With a sigh, Luo Fan said, "In this world, there are not only two kinds of people who can be killed and those who can't be killed. There are also more complicated distinctions. You have to see more and think more. In the future, you will naturally understand why I didn't kill him today." The heaven-splitting boy did not seem to understand and said, "Oh." Luo Fan did not care if he understood or not and said to him, "Next, you will pay attention to the fluctuations of this universe. Just by looking at any place that has a space-time channel, you will take the initiative to distinguish whether it is the people you killed before. If it is, you will go over and kill them until they die or leave." When the heaven-splitting boy heard this, his eyes lit up and he could not help but nod. Luo Fan saw that the heaven-splitting boy's values were really distorted, and he could not help but find it funny. After giving the order to the heaven-splitting boy, Luo Fan raised his hand and the heaven-splitting boy was already put into his heaven and earth in the sleeve. At this moment, Luo Fan was only an incarnation here, and he only had one magic treasure, the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. At this time, his heaven and earth in the sleeve was naturally empty. At this moment, when the heaven-splitting boy entered it, it could be considered that there was something inside. "Let me see. You guys can think of a way to come in." After putting away the heaven-splitting boy, Luo Fan thought to himself. What he was talking about was naturally the Book Supreme and the others. The Book Supreme and the others had cultivated from zero until now, and they were existences with the cultivation realm of the level 9 pseudo-sage. Their wills were firm. Naturally, there was no doubt. Although they had been forced to flee by Luo Fan twice before. He looked like a stray dog. If this happened to ordinary people, they would definitely be completely discouraged. They would no longer have the intention to challenge again. But for these level 9 pseudo-sages with firm wills, they would never give up. They must have found a way to enter this world at some point, and then used some time to analyze the rules and laws of this world. After analyzing the great Tao of this world, and completely restoring their strength, they would come to find trouble with Luo Fan. As for what method they would use, although Luo Fan was not completely sure, he could roughly guess that they must have used a secret and stealthy method to enter. Such a method. If Luo Fan wanted to sense them, he could naturally sense them at any time and discover them at any time. But in that case, no matter what he did, he would have to spare some effort to sense them. That was really too tiring. If there was no other way, Luo Fan would do this. But at this time, since there was such a good fighter like the heaven-splitting boy, how would Luo Fan be willing to sense this world and this universe all the time? That was why there was such an order. The heaven-splitting boy was extremely happy to be able to help Luo Fan. In Luo Fan's universe in the sleeve, he quietly sensed the aura of all the space-time channels that appeared in this universe, monitored them, and searched for the powerful level 9 pseudo-sages that he had dealt with before. This world was so vast that even if space-time channels rarely appeared, and even if very few cultivators left or entered this world through space-time channels, but in such a vast and boundless universe, there were naturally numerous space-time channels appearing and disappearing at every moment. Therefore, there was no need to worry that the heaven-splitting boy would have nothing to do. After giving the heaven-splitting boy a task, Luo Fan continued to head toward the center of this universe. This world was a brand new world of the same level as the demon realm, but it was completely different from the demon realm. Walking in this world, as long as one paid attention, one could almost find things that were beneficial to Luo Fan from anywhere. Therefore, the speed at which Luo Fan walked was not fast, but rather slow. After waiting for more than 100 years, he still hadn't reached the center of this universe. He was still wandering on the way. Just like a rich young master traveling to various famous scenic spots, he walked and stopped. Occasionally, he would stay somewhere for a few months when he was in the mood. Occasionally, when he was not in the mood, he would skip some planets that were said to be extremely beautiful. Over the years, he had seen many strange sights that left him in awe. He had also seen many people that made him feel interesting. As for the disciples of the sages, he would meet them almost every time he passed by a star region. And these disciples of the sages, regardless of whether they were strong or weak, or whether their status was high or low, were extremely polite to Luo Fan. They even vaguely revealed that they wanted to recruit Luo Fan for the three-sex meeting. From this point of view, although Luo Fan didn't know, in fact, he was already a real celebrity in this universe and this world. At least among the disciples of the sages, his reputation was already great. However, Luo Fan would only politely refuse any of the disciples of the sages who tried to recruit him. The more people tried to recruit him, the more cautious he had to be. When he first met Hong Zun, he didn't agree to recruit him. Later on, it was even more impossible for him to agree to recruit him. On this day, Luo Fan was walking casually on a planet that looked extremely primitive. There was even only a level 1 pseudo-sage, who was the controller. Suddenly, an inexplicable feeling surged in his heart. In a trance, he seemed to feel a strange power surging towards him through a strange channel. Feeling this strange change, Luo Fan frowned. His heart moved, and he raised his hand to the void. In an instant, his palm directly entered the void and directly entered that extremely strange channel. With a slight grasp, the strange power in the channel was instantly grasped in his hand. Then, the void shook, and the space-time within a radius of several light-years was instantly destroyed. It was destroyed at the same time as the void. It was the planet under Luo Fan's feet. This was an extremely huge planet with trillions of living beings living on it. It was also a planet with hundreds of millions of cultivators, hundreds of quasi-sages, and a pseudo-sage. This kind of destruction was indescribably powerful. It was unimaginable. Even quasi-sages and pseudo-sage existences couldn't resist this kind of destructive erosion. In an instant, they were completely wiped out, and all traces of their existence were completely erased. They didn't even have the slightest ability to resist. "Good move," Luo Fan said faintly. As he spoke, he raised his hand and pulled. A strange power was directly pulled out from the void by him. This power was formless, and its nature was unimaginably powerful. It even emitted an aura that was close to karma, and it struggled madly in Luo Fan's hand. and every time it struggled, it caused the surrounding laws and laws to shake violently. It caused the surrounding laws and laws to tremble violently, and even caused the surrounding spacetime to undergo a tragic change. It caused the originally destroyed spacetime to collapse even more thoroughly, and this part of the universe became even more chaotic. Freeze! Luo Fan shouted. Power surged between his hands, and a power that could even freeze the great Tao instantly erupted, locking the power firmly between his hands. This caused the nature of this power to be directly revealed. This was a form of karma that had been refined and changed. This kind of karma was self-contained, a cycle of its own. Within the power, it was already self-sufficient, and didn't need to interfere with anything in the outside world. This was a form of karma that Luo Fan had never seen before. The reason why the power of this karma was so powerful was because it was self-contained. Because its karma was a whole of its own, any existence that destroyed its internal balance would suffer the backlash of all the karma within it, and then all its might would erupt, causing that thing to directly suffer the effects of boundless karma. Moreover, this karma had already condensed an unknown amount of powerful karma, and the karma of countless living beings and objects. Now, the amount of karma within it was unimaginably huge. If it completely erupted, it might be a bit of an exaggeration to say that it could completely destroy this world, but to completely destroy dozens of vast worlds was definitely an underestimation. In this way, it was easy to imagine how powerful the power of this karma was. There's actually such a method of using karma. It seems that your understanding of karma has long surpassed my imagination, Luo Fan said lightly. Although the power of this karma was unimaginably terrifying, it was like ordinary plasticine in his hand. If he wanted to make it round, he could make it round, and if he wanted to flatten, he could flatten it. His relaxed appearance was truly unbelievable. The reason for this was also very simple. This karma had already been refined, changed, and reconstructed by someone using some extremely special method, becoming completely different from ordinary karma. However, it was still karma after all. In essence, there still wasn't much change. For Luo Fan, who had already deepened the use of the law of karma to the second level, as long as the nature of this karma didn't change, he could use the law of karma to control it. Karma and the law of karma were two things that were extremely closely connected. It could even be said that they were two sides of the same coin. Therefore, no matter who wanted to attack Luo Fan, using this kind of karma was definitely the worst choice. Luo Fan rubbed the karma wantonly, almost as if he was provoking it, causing the internal structure of the gate of karma to change randomly in a strange way. Almost every moment seemed like the last moment before it exploded. Almost every moment made one feel as if the karma was about to explode with all its power in the next instant, directly destroying the void within a radius of a few trillion light years. At this moment, a pitch-black figure materialized in the void. The place where this figure appeared was thousands of feet away from Luo Fan. He had the appearance of a man, and his body was only the size of a normal person. His entire body emanated an aura that was eternal and indestructible. This was the aura of a saint. Or rather, it was the aura of a saint. Someone who possessed such an aura. Either he was a personal disciple of a saint, or he had a powerful ability or an extremely powerful treasure bestowed by a saint, or he had already tried to break through to the saint realm. Although he did not succeed. But he had already obtained the existence of a saint. How could you do this? After the figure appeared, such a voice of disbelief came from his mouth. This voice was extremely clear. It could even be said to be extremely magnetic, and people who heard it could not help but have a good impression of it. Naturally, it was impossible for Luo Fan to have a good impression of it. He looked at the figure, and a calm expression appeared on his face. He said, "Why can't I do this?" As he said that, he raised his hand and pulled. This wave of power split off a bit and suddenly burrowed into the void. At this moment, the pitch-black figure suddenly shook, and the power in his body surged crazily. A karmic force, which was much weaker than the karmic force in Luo Fan's hand, gushed out and collided somewhere in the void. An earth-shattering rumble was heard. A terrifying shockwave began to spread out from that location. This shockwave was unimaginably strong. Moreover, compared to the karma produced by the collision of ordinary forces, it had all sorts of unimaginable changes. In the void, it completely devoured everything that could be devoured, and then evolved into countless wonderful worlds within the shockwave. Or, to be more specific, they were wonderful fragments of worlds. These fragments of worlds were all extremely strange. Inside the shockwave, they collided with each other in a mysterious way that could not be described with words, complementing each other and annihilating each other. It was as if countless worlds had appeared out of thin air in the void, instantly changing the world within a radius of thousands of light years. The place where Luo Fan was now was completely different from the place where he had fought with the Book Supreme. It was a cosmic void with no planets within a radius of several light years. Instead, it was a cosmic void with planets. Here, although the scope of the shockwave was much smaller than when Luo Fan fought with the Book Supreme, its influence was countless times greater. This world looked like the starry sky of the universe. It was different from the universe on Earth after the world was broken, where the whole universe was divided into galaxies and galaxies. However, as a complete universe, it naturally had clusters of stars. These clusters of stars formed a cluster of stars similar to galaxies. Almost all the stars belonged to such a cluster of stars. In other words, almost all the planets were in such a cluster of stars. And it just so happened that the planet where Luo Fan had been was in a cluster of stars. In this way, the result was very obvious. In this cluster of stars, within a radius of several thousand light years, there were more than tens of millions of stars. At this moment, the shock wave directly affected the surrounding area for thousands of light years, devouring all the matter that could be devoured and turning them into resources for the evolution of the world in the shock wave. The result was that tens of millions of stars, together with 10 times the number of planets around them, were completely devoured, completely destroyed. During this period of time, there were hundreds of thousands of life-bearing planets that were completely destroyed, although there were not hundreds of millions of them. This result was more than 10,000 times more tragic than the battle between Luo Fan and the Book Supreme. No! At this moment, the pitch-black figure couldn't help but scream miserably. As he screamed, above Luo Fan's head, a pitch-black tribulation cloud suddenly appeared out of nowhere. This tribulation cloud was more than 10,000 times thicker than when Luo Fan cultivated the treasure spirit for the sky-opening axe. When it appeared, Luo Fan felt an indescribable pressure coming from above. In a trance, he even felt that he was rejected by the whole world, the whole heaven and earth. It was as if the heaven and earth already hated him and wanted to do its best to erase him. Killing will cause the heavenly tribulation? Luo Fan's heart tightened. After his heart tightened, he immediately came back to his senses and figured out what was going on. He couldn't help but feel helpless for his slow realization. I should have thought of this earlier. If I am beneficial to the heaven and earth of this world, I will be rewarded with the merits of heaven and earth. If I am harmful to the heaven and earth of this world, I will naturally be punished. Chapter 1455. Luo Fan felt ashamed that he had overlooked this obvious fact, but the development of the outside world would not change because of his shame. Watermark advertisement test. Watermark advertisement test. At this moment, the tribulation clouds in the sky had undergone a drastic change. Endless destructive energy descended from the sky, turning into endless lightning, endless strange flames, endless strange water, endless strange magma, and so on and so forth. All kinds of strange and mysterious energy poured down on him. This terrifying power completely separated the space-time within a radius of tens of thousands of light years from the outside world, causing the spacetime inside to form a complete world of its own. It was a world completely enveloped by destructive power that was extremely dangerous even for level 9 pseudo-saints. In this world, boundless power was destroying the two targets that existed here, Luo Fan, as well as the pitch-black figure that had just appeared. This destructive power almost reminded Luo Fan of the state of chaos. He felt that the absolute chaos and destruction was even comparable to the power of the state of chaos. In the face of such an attack, Luo Fan could only raise the divine sky cauldron above his head and let the power of the divine sky cauldron cover his entire body. The endless attacks that surged over could only affect the divine sky cauldron. Only after breaking through the defense of the divine sky cauldron would there be a chance of hurting him. Those kinds of attacks were too terrifying. Even the powerful divine sky cauldron could not completely defend against them. Although the majority of the attacks were intercepted amidst the endless explosions and terrifying vibrations, there was still a portion of the attacks that broke through the heavenly cauldron's defense and directly bombarded Luo Fan's body. Fortunately, Luo Fan had already understood the essence of cultivation and possessed a will that was similar to Holy Decree, but not Holy Decree. Under its protection, the remaining attacks, which had been weakened by countless times, could not break through his body's defense. He heard himself. They were sent out of the divine court heavenly cauldron and into the endless terrifying attacks in the surroundings. This formed a strange cycle. When this cycle was truly established, Luo Fan relaxed a little and began to turn his gaze to the pitch-black figure opposite him. The pitch-black figure was surrounded by a strange aura. After the refinement, the karma flew in all directions and circled around his body, forming a powerful and perfect defense that isolated the endless terrifying attacks from the surroundings as much as possible. However, it was a pity that he had refined it before. The most powerful karma was now in the hands of Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, even though he possessed a large amount of karma and possessed formidable might, he was utterly unable to bring forth his greatest might. Therefore, as for the defense against the terrifying attacks around it, it was impossible for it to achieve a perfect defense. As a result, more than half of the attacks broke through his defenses and directly bombarded his body. Although this person had the aura of a saint or a saint, facing this heavenly tribulation that was completely targeted at him, facing this terrifying attack that could separate time and space and recreate the universe, even if it was only half of it, it was still not something he could withstand. Every attack seemed to leave an indelible and terrifying wound on his body. Moreover, every attack directly poured into his body, causing his entire body to constantly emit waves of power that directly converged into the terrifying attacks around him. In this kind of situation, the situation directly led to an irreversible sinking into the abyss. Faced with such a situation, the pitch-black figure's face gradually revealed itself. It was the figure of a middle-aged man. However, his expression was one of extreme fear at this moment, and his eyes were filled with deep remorse. Luo Fan looked at this figure and frowned. He did not know this person, in fact. He had never even heard of this person. If that was the case, why did this person attack him? Moreover, the attack was so powerful that it directly used his strongest attack, the kind that completely destroyed him. Fellow cultivator, may I know how I offended you and why did you attack me? Luo Fan thought and asked. When the person heard Luo Fan's words, he looked at Luo Fan during a gap between attacks. When he saw how relaxed Luo Fan was, he couldn't help but yell, "Save me!" Luo Fan only smiled and said, "Fellow cultivator, do you think that I am that kind of unprincipled person? Fellow cultivator, you wanted to kill me just now and now you are asking for my help? Do you really think that I'll forget what happened in the past at this time?" Hearing this, the middle-aged man's expression changed drastically and said, "It was my fault for attacking you just now. But now that I have already paid the price for my actions, this matter should come to an end, right? Now that we are facing this heavenly punishment, we have to work together and unite as one in order to successfully pass through it. At this time, personal grudges definitely do not make up for the losses. Hearing this, Luo Fan only shook his head and said, I don't think that we need to work together to pass through this heavenly punishment. Hearing this, the man yelled, Do you think this is the full power of this heavenly punishment? You are wrong. This heavenly punishment is heavenly punishment because it is absolute. If it can't wipe us out in the end, then this heavenly punishment may even summon the projection of a sage. By then, even if you are 10,000 times stronger, you will definitely die. Therefore, we have to work together and break this heavenly punishment before it can summon the projection of a sage. The projection of a sage. Hearing this, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat and an indescribable sense of fear welled up in him. Even if the sages in this world were just fake sages, the power of the sages was still unbelievably powerful. They were absolutely omnipotent in this world. In this way, even the weakest projection of a sage was not something that he could resist in this world. If this heavenly punishment really summoned the projection of a sage to attack him, then what awaited him? It would definitely be death. Instantly, Luo Fan decided that he could not let this heavenly punishment develop to that stage. However, although he thought so in his heart, but he didn't change his words immediately. Instead, he said directly, Although I don't want things to develop to that stage, but I still have a psychological barrier to cooperating with you, fellow Taoist. I don't know if you can get rid of my psychological barrier? Hearing this, the man's irritation went without saying. At this moment, when he was about to encounter the projection of a sage and face the irreparable fate of death, the man in front of him was still entangled with such an unnecessary little thing. This kind of behavior that didn't see the big picture was simply unbelievably stubborn and stupid. However, at this moment, the man in front of him could still hold on, but he couldn't. Therefore, he could only suppress the anger in his heart and said, I don't know how to get rid of your psychological barrier? Luo Fan said this. For example, who are you? Why did you attack me? What are the benefits of attacking me? How can you compensate me? How can you make me believe that you won't attack me again? As long as these problems are solved, my psychological barrier will naturally be removed. Hearing this, the man's expression kept changing. Obviously, he was having a very painful psychological struggle. After a while, he gritted his teeth and said, My name is Ningzun, and I'm a rogue cultivator. This time, I attacked you for the first place in the meet of the three sects, to become a disciple of the Buddha, and to become his personal disciple. Now that I've provoked the heavenly punishment, even if I get the first place, I won't have the chance to become a disciple of the Buddha. So, you don't have to worry about me attacking you anymore. What does it have to do with me that you want the first place? Luo Fan was even more confused. Could it be that fellow Taoist is making fun of me? Everyone in the world knows your name. You're the one who is most likely to get the first place in the meet of the three sects. If I can't get rid of you first, no one can say that they have enough confidence to get the first place, Ningzun said coldly. This time, Luo Fan was really surprised. I never said that I would participate in the meet of the three sects. Many disciples of the sages tried to recruit me, but I rejected them all. Why would anyone believe that I would actually fight for the first place in the meet of the three sects? As for why he was famous in the world and why people thought that he was more powerful, he was not that surprised. He had fought twice in this world, and each time, his enemies were either more than a dozen level 9 pseudo-sanctuaries, or more level 9 pseudo-sanctuaries, and multiple supreme venerables. In the battles, the absolute suppression and suppression had already unleashed his power incisively and vividly. Anyone who could sense his two attacks would think that his strength had surpassed level 9 pseudo-sanctuaries, and he was definitely at the top among the supreme venerables. Obviously, How could those experts not sense the battles that completely destroyed the void of the universe within a radius of hundreds of millions of light-years? Even an ordinary level 3 pseudo-sanctuary immortal longevity could sense such battles, let alone other more powerful cultivators. Therefore, he was famous in the world, and everyone knew that he had the strength to fight for the first place. This was really normal. Hearing Luo Fan's words, that venerable lord sneered and said, "Fellow Taoist, aren't you talking nonsense? If you had accepted the recruitment earlier, why would I have attacked you? Accepting the recruitment of a sage is equivalent to becoming their external help. No matter how good your performance is, you are not qualified to become a personal disciple of a sage. If you didn't want to become a personal disciple of a sage, how could you have rejected the recruitment of those disciples of the sages?" Hearing this explanation, Luo Fan could only smile bitterly. He didn't expect that to be the problem. He had rejected the recruitment of the sages because he didn't want to get involved in this mess. However, he didn't expect that he would give others such a message and make them think that he had made this choice to avoid losing his future. It was no wonder that he had rejected so many people's recruitment. All along they had only expressed their regret, and none of them thought that he didn't know how to appreciate favors. "I see. It seems that no one will plot against me from now on." Luo Fan sighed. "Since you already know about this, I wonder if your psychological barrier has been completely eliminated? Can you save me now? I can't hold on any longer." Venerable Lord shouted at this moment. Hearing this, Luo Fan just shook his head and said, "You can't say that. No matter what, it's all your fault that I've been punished by the heavens this time. According to what you said, this has caused me to lose my future of becoming a disciple of a sage. This is such a huge loss, and fellow Taoist did not give me enough compensation. How can my psychological barrier be removed just like that?" Hearing this, Venerable Lord couldn't help but look a little sluggish. How could he not hear it? Luo Fan was demanding an exorbitant price. From his previous performance, it was clear that he didn't care about becoming a disciple of a sage at all. He really didn't have any interest in the Three Religions Conference. Now that he was talking about compensation, it actually became like this. It was a huge loss that he couldn't become a disciple of a sage. This was simply extortion. If I had a treasure that could be comparable to becoming a disciple of a sage, why would I still need to become a disciple of a sage? He shouted. "I don't have it." "Then forget it." "What a pity." Luo Fan sighed. After saying that, he no longer paid any attention to the venerable ability lord. He only focused on resisting the boundless attacks coming at him from all around him. It looked like the negotiation had broken down, and he didn't want to communicate with Venerable Lord anymore. Being able to see this, there was naturally no need to mention the grievance and annoyance in his heart. As a rogue cultivator who could cultivate to the 9th level of the Sage Realm and failed to break through to the Sage Realm, he still didn't die. Instead, he obtained the Sage's will and became a supreme venerable. Needless to say, Venerable Lord was proud of himself. In the past, in this world, he would not even give a damn about the disciples of ordinary sages. He would only smile at the disciples of sages who were truly comparable to him. As for the other rogue cultivators, he only had contempt and disdain for them. This could be seen from the fact that he actually set the first place of the Three Religions Conference as his goal, and even wanted to eliminate Luo Fan, who was recognized as the most likely to become the first place of the Three Religions Conference. But now, such a proud existence was directly extorted by someone. This kind of aggrieved and annoyed feeling was even more unbearable than when ordinary people encountered the same thing. However, the real situation didn't give him too much time to immerse himself in annoyance and grievance. Soon, the feeling that his body was about to collapse made him finally make a decision. He shouted, "I don't have any treasure, but I have a strange technique that I obtained from the outer domain. It can condense karma and turn invisible karma into magic treasures. I'm willing to give it to you as compensation." When he said that, Venerable Lord felt as if his heart was being cut by a knife. It was so painful that his eyes turned red. After all, this divine power was what he relied on to become a supreme venerable. The reason why he was able to become a supreme venerable after cultivating for trillions of years as a rogue cultivator was because of this divine power. This divine ability was something he had obtained when he was roaming the outer realms again. At that time, the moment he obtained this divine power, he knew that this divine power was more precious than the inheritance of a sage. The divine power involved all sorts of exquisite principles and indescribable wonders. There were endless secrets that he couldn't completely understand until now. According to his understanding, even the inheritance of a sage and the divine power that the disciples of a sage cultivated could not reach this level. Therefore, he valued this divine power more than his own life. He had even made up his mind long ago that even if he died in the future, he would bring this divine power with him into his coffin. Unexpectedly, today, when his life was in danger, he finally had no choice but to take out this divine ability and hand it over to someone who was obviously extorting him in exchange for that person's help. Thinking about this, the pain in his heart became even more intense. Luo Fan heard that and said, "A divine power? Do you think that there is any divine power in this world that can tempt us? Although this divine power that refines karma seems very strange, it's only strange. Compared to your life, I think it's nothing." Venerable Lord Ning was already heartbroken. When he heard how Luo Fan belittled this divine power, he couldn't help but become even more furious. Nevertheless, as a supreme venerable one, he would not be so infuriated as to exchange his life for Luo Fan's regret. Instead, he directly raised his hand and turned half of the content of the divine power into invisible spiritual information. Through some invisible channel, it was transmitted to the strange karma in Luo Fan's hand. The heavenly punishment could even threaten a level 9 fake sage. If he chose to be in an ordinary environment, he could directly transmit his memories and thoughts out of thin air. Once these memories or thoughts left his body, they would naturally be destroyed by the heavenly punishment. It would be impossible for them to be transmitted to Luo Fan. In contrast, directly using the strange connection between his body and the strange karma to transmit memories or thoughts, that was completely different. The connection between his body and the magic treasure that he had refined. It was an extremely mysterious connection that was similar to the wonderful connection between his body and his clone. Such a connection. It could almost surpass two completely different perfect worlds, just like Luo Fan. It was naturally no problem for it to be transmitted through the heavenly punishment. Luo Fan instantly sensed the change in the strange karma in his hand. He thought for a while and already knew the reason. He did not hesitate. He directly began to read the information of the half-divine power. Although he had said it so disdainfully, as if he did not care about the half-divine power at all. But in fact, he was extremely curious about the divine power that this venerable one dared to use as compensation. With one look, he could not help but be shocked. This is definitely the divine power of a sage. In an instant Luo Fan understood. This divine power was about a method to control karma. This method was extremely wonderful. It was extremely exquisite. Although all the content was only a few words, it had already opened the door to a vast world in front of him. He suddenly realized that the karma that he originally thought was only this. It actually had such a profound mystery. It turned out that the control of karma that he previously thought was actually only superficial. Looking at this divine power, he instinctively recalled the refining method of the enlightenment futon that he had seen on Wu Daozi's Qilin Cliff when he had just returned to this time dimension. This divine power could give him such a feeling. This divine power was definitely the divine power of a sage created by a sage. At that time, Just the aura from the Enlightenment futon had already made Luo Fan be influenced by the way of a sage. With his cultivation realm at that time, it was impossible for him to understand the way of a sage. He could only be influenced by it, which allowed him to make a huge breakthrough in his cultivation realm. Now, if he were to directly obtain this divine power that was highly likely to be a real sage, then the benefits that it would bring him could be imagined. Just as Luo Fan was secretly excited, the information was cut off. But it was gone instinctively. Luo Fan wanted to ask, "What's next?" Luckily, he still had some rationality left in him. He knew that asking this would definitely ruin things. Therefore, he forcibly suppressed his emotions and directly engraved this information into his memory. With a calm expression, he said, "This divine power still gave me some inspiration. Forget it. In order to get through this heavenly punishment, I will suffer some losses. This divine power will do." Needless to say, Ningzun felt aggrieved. But since things had come to this, he could only say, "If that's the case, I will give you the second half of the divine power. You return this karma to me first. Wait until I have a firm foothold, then we can talk about how to get through this heavenly punishment." Luo Fan forcibly suppressed his heartbeat and nodded. "That's right." As he spoke, he let go of the karma in his hand. However, he was still in a state where he could control it again at any time and completely suppress all changes in the karma. At the same time, Ningzun felt that the connection between him and the karma suddenly became closer. He could vaguely control the karma again. However, there were still some restrictions, and this connection could be completely cut off at any time. Knowing that this was Luo Fan waiting for the second half of the divine power, he gritted his teeth and followed the spiritual connection to transmit the second half of the divine power to the karma. At this time, Luo Fan was still paying attention to the karma. The moment the information appeared on the karma, he instantly plundered it. It melted into his memory and fused with the half of the divine power that he had memorized before, turning into a complete divine power. In order to absorb the information as quickly as possible, he even completely let go of his control over the karma. In an instant, Ningzun completely controlled his karma and summoned it back easily. With a burst of force, the terrifying attacks that were pouncing towards him were completely repelled, allowing him to escape from the hopeless situation where he was on the verge of death. Chapter 1456. Although he felt that he might have suffered a great loss, what was done could not be undone. He could no longer erase the memory of that theurgy from the depths of Luo Fan's memory. Watermark advertisement test. Therefore, at this time, he could only swallow the thought of suffering a loss. Although he was no longer in a state of near death, the heavenly punishment still existed. There was still a long way to go to safety. Before the heavenly punishment was completely destroyed, anything else would just be empty talk. With a thought, Ningzun's body shook. In an instant, a powerful force blasted out from within his body. In an instant, it fused with the karma he took out from Luo Fan's hand. With a violent tremor, the protective circle formed was expanded by 10 times. After such a change, the terrifying force around him was repelled. In the blink of an eye, a calm area with a radius of several hundred feet was formed around him. All the destructive force was repelled and no longer affected him. Instead, it could only act on the protective circle in the outside world. Strands of force broke through the defense and entered the area with a radius of several hundred feet. However, they were easily destroyed by him. He was in a much more relaxed state than Luo Fan. At this time, after Luo Fan truly obtained the sage magical ability, although all his thoughts were on finding time to devote his mind to the magical ability as soon as possible, he still didn't have the time to do so. However, in the face of such a terrifying heavenly punishment, he couldn't do it right away. He could only focus on the heavenly punishment in front of him. "Now that you are out of danger, how do you plan to deal with the heavenly punishment?" Luo Fan asked calmly. Hearing this, Ningzun collected his emotions and said, "The source of the heavenly punishment is the great path. If we want to completely eliminate the heavenly punishment, we must change the great path. To eliminate the sins that we have committed. Therefore, we must first enter the great pathland." Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded. This method sounded reasonable. As for the great pathland, it was obviously the existence of the great path. It was just that the name of this world was different from other worlds. In essence, there was not much difference. Then how should we appease the great path? Eliminate the sins we have committed? Luo Fan asked again. If there is heaven and earth merit, then things will be simple. As long as he had a shred of heaven and earth merit as a primer, then he could spread the boundless power into the world, and he would naturally be able to achieve his goal. If he didn't have it now, he could only search for the part of the great Tao that caused the heavenly punishment. He poured endless power into it and used the power to affect the great Tao. In the end, he eliminated the abnormality of that part of the great Tao. I only hope that there's enough time. Venerable Ning sighed. When Luo Fan heard Ability Venerable's words, he finally understood Ability Venerable's train of thought. If there was heaven and earth merit, the way to use it was to use it as a primer. Using a method that was in line with the heaven and earth's merit, allowing the heaven and earth to grow and ultimately benefit the heaven and earth, allowing the heaven and earth to give birth to more heaven and earth merit. That would offset the sins they had committed before. For a level 9 pseudo-saint who could generate energy out of thin air, endless power, which could drive ordinary cultivators crazy, was only a matter of a thought. Therefore, it was obviously quite easy to accomplish. As for the second method, it was to directly suppress the great Tao without heaven and wipe out the changes or bites of the great Tao caused by the sins they had committed, compared to the first method. Although this method was direct, to directly change the great Tao was equivalent to going against the heavens. Naturally, it was many times more difficult and the time needed would be extremely shocking. In this way, the second method was obviously much worse than the first. It was no wonder that Venerable Ning sighed. Venerable Ning himself didn't know that Luo Fan had the heaven and earth merit. Therefore, he had suggested the first method because Luo Fan was an outsider, so he had specially explained it to him. In fact, he had already decided to use the second method. As he spoke, Luo Fan smiled and said, "Heaven and earth merit? I happen to have a little bit of it." Venerable Ning was about to go on talking about what to pay attention to when using the second method, what key points could not go wrong, and how to hurry up. However, when he suddenly heard what Luo Fan said, he could not react for a moment and asked in a daze, "What did you say, fellow Taoist? I think I heard wrong just now. I didn't hear it clearly." Luo Fan smiled and raised his hand. A merit seal appeared in his hand. This merit seal emitted a faint golden glow. As soon as they appeared, the heavenly wrath that were bombarding them froze for a moment. Although they didn't stop immediately, a change that had never happened since the beginning occurred. It became weaker. After realizing this, Venerable Ning finally knew that he was not hearing things just now. This was indeed heaven and earth merit. How is this possible? Venerable Ning shouted instinctively. This sentence, this was not the first time he had said it since he met Luo Fan. Heaven and earth merit has never appeared in this world since ancient times. Even the method of using heaven and earth merit to eliminate heavenly punishments is only a legend. I have never heard of anyone using the first method to complete this process with the help of heaven and earth merit. How can you have heaven and earth merit? Luo Fan was naturally not in the mood to explain his previous guess. He just smiled faintly and said, "The truth is already in front of you. Do you still have any doubts?" After all these years, no sages had come to him, and no disciples of the sages had come to him to talk about heaven and earth merit. However, Luo Fan had gradually relaxed. At least, this little bit of heaven and earth merit was obviously insignificant to the sages. It was not enough for them to come to him for trouble. As for the three sages of this world, the Taoist ancestor, the demon ancestor, and the Buddha ancestor, they did not know that he had heaven and earth merit. Luo Fan did not even dare to think about it. As sages, even if they were fake sages in Luo Fan's eyes, it was only because they could not leave this world, and could not survive after it was destroyed. Their power in this world was not much different from that of sages. Omniscient, omnipotent, omniscient. That was simply a certainty. How could they not know that he had heaven and earth merit? Since they already knew, they had never sent anyone to cause trouble for him. Obviously, the situation could only be as he guessed. They could not be bothered about the fact that Luo Fan had this little bit of heaven and earth merit. After understanding this, as for letting people know that he had heaven and earth merit, he was not as determined as before. Moreover, in the face of the heavenly punishment, if he did not take it out, he might eventually summon the projection of the sage, an existence that he could not resist at all. Therefore, he could only take out the heaven and earth merit at this time. After hearing what Luo Fan said, Ningzun seemed to have woken up from a dream. Indeed, now was not the time to talk about other times. Since he had heaven and earth merit, they did not need to use the second method and risk the risk of not being able to resolve the heavenly punishment until the heavenly punishment summoned the projection of the sage. Therefore, at this time, he said directly, "Okay. Since you have heaven and earth merit, let's quickly enter the land of the Great Way and start to eliminate the source of the heavenly punishment." Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded. He smiled slightly. Without hesitation, with a thought, he directly guided the power of the heavenly punishment and directly blasted through the void, directly blasting open the barrier in the unseen world, allowing him to directly rush into the unseen world and arrive at the unknown length and size of the Great Way. Of course, entering the unseen world in the heavenly punishment was not as easy as before, and he needed to use a special method. However, this was not difficult for Luo Fan. For Ningzun, it was not a problem either. Although he was a step slower than Luo Fan, very soon, the moment Luo Fan appeared in the unseen world, Ningzun's figure directly broke through the barrier and appeared in the unseen world, not far away from Luo Fan. Using some unknown method, he also stepped into the unseen world. However, the power of the heavenly punishment was extremely mysterious. Even though the two of them came here, it felt similar to the outside world, and they were also under the attack of the power of the heavenly punishment at all times. In fact, perhaps because they had come here to avoid it, the power of the heavenly punishment seemed to have increased several times, and it felt like the time when it increased to the point where it could summon the projection of the sage was getting closer. Sensing this change, Ningzun hurriedly said, "My friend, quickly use your magic power and draw a trace of heaven and earth merit into the Great Way." Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded and no longer hesitated. He raised his hand and gently pointed. In an instant, the heaven and earth merit from the merit seal rushed out, directly crossing the strange void in the unseen world and rushing into the Great Way below. In Luo Fan's hands, this trace of heaven and earth merit did not emit any terrifying power, but after entering the Great Path, it was like a drop of water falling into boiling oil. It began to produce an incomparably huge reaction, causing the unknown length and width of the Great Path below to suddenly change from extreme stillness to extreme activity. However, this change did not continue, and it soon began to subside. Then, a strange connection appeared in Luo Fan's heart. This allowed Luo Fan to instantly know where he needed to pour the power into, and that was the most suitable place. With a thought, Luo Fan casually pointed at that position. Then, an inexhaustible power was born from his body out of thin air, directly crossing the strange void, and crazily pouring into that position. As the power was poured into him, the heavenly punishment that was acting on Luo Fan suddenly slowed down. This kind of slowing was different from the change when the merit seal of the heaven and earth had appeared. Instead, it was a kind of fundamental change, as if the heavenly punishment had weakened and slowed down. However, since this was the case for Luo Fan, Ningzun did not have this kind of benefit. The power of the heavenly punishment around him was still so terrifying. Moreover, because the power of the heavenly punishment had decreased and was acting on Luo Fan, more of it was being transferred to Ningzun, causing the power of the heavenly punishment to become even stronger. After discovering this, Ningzun did not dare to be careless anymore. He immediately raised his hand and pointed at the spot that Luo Fan had pointed at. Endless power was created by him, directly crossing the void, and poured into that spot. As the endless power poured into him, his body also experienced the same change that Luo Fan had encountered. The power of the heavenly punishment that he had encountered also weakened. This change finally made Ningzun feel relieved. It seems that it was really a success. It's all thanks to the Heaven and Earth Merit Seal, fellow Taoist. Ningzun sighed. However, Luo Fan only smiled slightly. Creating power out of thin air and pouring it into that spot, for him, did not need to waste much energy at all. At the same time, he still had enough energy to think and even cultivate. With a thought, he had the idea of looking at the complete sage's magical power at this time. Thinking of this, he suddenly became a little excited. A complete sage's magical power. Moreover, it was not the kind of false sage's magical power. It might have come from this universe on Earth. It was created by the 7 real sages, the magical power of the real sages. It was really expensive. If he could get a little bit of harvest from it, it would be very beneficial to him. Thinking of this, he wanted to focus his attention on that magical power. At this moment, an inexplicable sense of crisis made him awaken from the depths of his memory. What's going on? He was shocked, looking around for the source of the crisis that made him feel it. At this moment, he also found that Ningzun's expression had also become extremely shocked. Obviously, he should also have the same feeling, and it might even be stronger than Luo Fan's feeling. Just as Luo Fan was looking around, suddenly, the endless power of the heavenly punishment began to quickly condense. In the blink of an eye, a strange humanoid shadow condensed in the void. It was unbelievably mysterious. Just that shadow, that outline. It had already made Luo Fan have a feeling that he could not resist, and he had a feeling that even if he combined everything he had, it was not even a billionth of that person's power. How is this possible? Why is there a sage's aura being summoned? Isn't the power of the heavenly punishment already weakened? Ningzun screamed. At this moment, that shadow had already completely stabilized. In an instant, an incomparably strong, eternal, and indestructible aura was emitted from that shadow. This aura was so strong that even though Luo Fan had gone through so many holy wills, and even the holy will that he condensed himself was many times weaker than the aura emitted by this shadow. The gap between them was as huge as the distance between heaven and earth. At this moment, Luo Fan's thought was, it turns out that the gap between a holy will and a sage, even if it's a false sage, is actually so huge. Calling it a holy will seems to have greatly exaggerated its function. The illusory figure began to gradually change and solidify. In the end, it turned into a real human body without any facial features. This human body was wearing a long black robe and was floating in the void. Just the essence of its existence alone had already caused the immeasurable length and width of the great path below to cave in, as if the great path could not withstand its existence. Before it completely condensed, Luo Fan could still sense that it was condensed from a sage's true aura. But now that it had completely taken shape and turned into a complete entity, the essence that he could feel before had completely disappeared. At this moment, when he looked at that shadow again, he could only sense how powerful it was. As for its essence, he could no longer sense it at all. The shadow slightly shook its body, and in an instant, a terrifying and unparalleled attractive force was produced from within its body. How strong was this attraction? Just how strong was it? The attractive force only appeared for a billionth of a second. However, it was this short period of time that caused the entire heavenly punishment, which even the combined forces of Luo Fan and Ning Zun could not resist, to completely disappear and be absorbed by it. At this moment, the universe became empty and calm. The terrifying destructive effect from before, that independent spacetime, seemed to have never appeared at this moment. It seems that the heavenly punishment did not want to disappear just like that. It made its final resistance at the end. Luo Fan thought to himself and sighed at this moment. At this moment, he had already caught his breath and recovered from the shock of the aura emitted by the shadow. His mind started to work, and in a short while, he had already figured out what was going on in front of him. If the heavenly punishment was allowed to develop naturally, after a certain period of time, it would summon the projection of a sage that had supreme magical powers and could even completely wipe out all existences that were not at the sage level with a thought or a glance. When that time came, not to mention Luo Fan, even if all the level 9 pseudo-sages and all the supreme venerables in the entire universe of Earth were added together, they would not be able to survive the heavenly punishment. Previously, Luo Fan and Ning Zun used the heaven and earth merit as a guide. They used a special method to remove the firewood from the bottom of the pot, to eliminate the heavenly punishment. In the eyes of the two of them, this was naturally a way to save themselves. It was an effort to allow them to escape and ascend to the heavens to survive. But for the heavenly punishment, this kind of action was equivalent to taking its life. It was destroying it from the root. It was fundamentally denying the ultimate goal of its existence. For the heavenly punishment, of course, it was absolutely intolerable. Therefore, at that time, the heavenly punishment naturally reacted in a way that was originally impossible. It forcibly summoned the projection of a sage before it accumulated enough power. It wanted to directly accomplish the purpose of its existence. It wanted to completely wipe out both Luo Fan and Ning Zun. And in the case of insufficient power accumulation, the heavenly punishment's effort to summon the projection of a sage was unsuccessful. In the end, it could only summon such a little aura of a sage. This was the root cause of the appearance of the sage's aura. Luo Fan had a deep understanding of the nature of the sages in this world, so he felt different from the cultivators in this world. However, he was able to recover from the shock of the aura and think rationally, figuring out the root cause of the aura's appearance. However, Ning Zun was a cultivator born and raised in this world. The omnipotence of the sages had long been deeply engraved in the depths of his heart. At this moment, the impact of the aura's shock was 100 times greater than that of Luo Fan. At this time, he was still shouting hysterically. Even the infusion of power into the place that Luo Fan was pointing at stopped because he could not control it. As for the root cause of the aura's appearance, it was even more impossible to understand at this moment. The figure formed by the sage's aura raised his hand and gently patted the void. There was no change in this pat. In other words, the change had already exceeded the limits of what Luo Fan could understand and even sense. With this pat, Ning Zun, who had completely lost his composure due to the shock of the aura, was like a pile of sand. In an instant, he was divided into countless small parts and splashed everywhere. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a puff of smoke and disappeared without a trace. Only a sage's eternal and indestructible aura was left in the original place. As for Ning Zun's aura and even all traces, it had completely disappeared. Obviously, the Supreme Venerable, who was originally confident of becoming the strongest existence in the three religions meet, had been killed by the sage's aura's mysterious pat that Luo Fan could not see through at all. The terrifying aura of the sage was beyond Luo Fan's imagination. Good heavens, the aura of the sage is actually so powerful! Luo Fan's heart was filled with indescribable shock. Although he had long known that any existence related to the sage was unbelievably mysterious and contained mysteries that could not be understood by any non-sage cultivators, however, He still did not expect that the figure formed by the sage's aura would actually be so powerful. Although Ningzun had suffered a great loss in the hands of Luo Fan, he had obtained the sage's magical power, which was tens of thousands of times stronger than that of ordinary supreme venerables. Such an existence had died in the hands of the sage's aura without anyone knowing how he had died. One could imagine how powerful the figure formed by the sage's aura was. At this moment, for the first time, Luo Fan finally had the feeling that his incarnation was going to die here. However, although this was already the case, Luo Fan did not intend to give up and die. He shouted softly and raised his hand, pouring the endless power that he was creating into the heaven-splitting axe inside the universe in his sleeve. In an instant, the heaven-splitting axe shone brightly. Afterwards, traces of an eternal and indestructible aura were emitted from the axe, causing the child splitting heavens to groan uncontrollably as he stood within it. Chapter 1457. This axe contained all the mysteries of the heaven and earth splitting technique. It could be said that this axe was the first time Luo Fan had used this axe since he had mastered it. The strongest axe. Facing this figure formed by the aura of a sage, facing this existence that was so powerful that it made him feel fear, all his potential was stimulated, and he performed this axe perfectly. Under this axe, the void trembled. Even the great path below trembled slightly under this axe. Watermark advertisement test. Watermark advertisement test. In an instant, endless rules and laws were produced in the unseen world. Endless spacetime directly transformed this unseen world into a strange world, making this unseen world no longer seem like an unseen world. If this axe was aimed at any other supreme venerable, even a powerful saint venerable, he would definitely have to dodge in an extremely embarrassing manner. Otherwise, he would die and his soul would be destroyed. However, it was obvious that the one facing this axe was not a supreme venerable, nor was it a level 9 pseudo-saint, but a powerful existence formed by the aura of a sage. Just now, this existence had casually slapped an extremely powerful venerable to the point that his body and Tao had vanished, and even his soul had been dispersed. How could he be like an ordinary supreme venerable in the face of such an axe? Seeing the axe flying towards him, the figure simply raised his hand and swatted at the axe. This slap still looked so ordinary, as if it was just a casual slap from an ordinary person. There was not the slightest bit of mystery in it, and there was no way to recognize any trace of abnormality in it. Obviously, this slap also had a mystery that surpassed the limits of Luo Fan's understanding. The truth contained in it was definitely so profound that Luo Fan could not imagine it. With this slap, Luo Fan felt an unimaginable danger surging up. Then, everything returned to normal in an instant. Just now, his heaven-splitting axe had created all the strange phenomena and the endless time and space that had been created within it. Endless rules and laws. All of them disappeared in an instant, as if they had never existed. Follow him. Even down below, the great Tao that had changed because of the cleaving of the heavens and earth was instantly smoothed out. It was as if the cleaving had never appeared in the first place. At this time, these kinds of incredible changes did not occupy Luo Fan's attention at all. At this moment, an indescribable fear welled up in his heart. This was because he had already sensed that there was a strange power directly moving towards him. It was acting on the very essence of his life, and was using an incomparably wondrous and bizarre method to completely erase the essence of his life, to completely erase all traces of his existence. At this moment, the heaven-splitting axe in his hand seemed like an extremely ordinary axe. He was frozen in midair, unable to move at all, much less continue to slash at that figure. So strong. This was the only thought in Luo Fan's mind. He roared, and his body suddenly exploded. Boundless power burst forth from his body, sweeping across the world in a frenzy. Although Luo Fan was only a level 7 pseudo-sage, the power that he possessed was not something that even the strongest supremacies could compare to. If he were to self-destruct just like that, the effect would be terrifying, shocking, and unimaginable. In just an instant, the barrier between the void, the rules and laws, and the real space-time layer was completely shattered. Endless power directly poured into the surface world. As this power poured in, the space-time within a radius of tens of thousands of light-years that had been cleaned up several times was instantly destroyed. Everything turned into a gray and chaotic state. Moreover, this chaos spread in all directions at an extremely fast speed, and it began to engulf stars and planets with life one after another. Such a terrifying force charged directly at the figure formed by the saint's aura. Moreover, it was many times more powerful than the other directions that it had charged at the figure formed by the saint's aura. However, this explosion of power that could destroy time and space, and even affect the foundation of the entire world, was like a spring breeze when it charged towards the figure. It didn't affect the figure at all, and it didn't cause any changes to the figure at all. It was as if this was just a breeze, however, although he was not affected. The figure still stopped eroding and destroying Luo Fan's life essence. Instead, he raised his hand and grabbed at the air, directly producing an extremely powerful and terrifying power that enveloped the destructive power that was produced by Luo Fan's self-destruction. The area that was spreading became wider and wider, and it looked like it was about to engulf tens of millions of planets. With a slight pinch, the endless power was already pinched in his hand, turning into a grayish crystal ball. Everything that was destroyed by Luo Fan's self-destruction had completely returned to normal during this process. It seemed like everything that was gray earlier was just an illusion. The figure formed by the sage's aura had endless power, and it was not afraid of the terrifying attack produced by Luo Fan's self-destruction at all. However, it was summoned by the heavenly punishment to punish Luo Fan and Ning Zun for destroying so many planets and so many lives. Under such circumstances, it naturally could not allow the aftermath of its battle with Luo Fan to cause the same kind of damage. If it caused the same kind of damage, wouldn't it be going against the purpose of its existence? Wouldn't it be punishing itself and destroying itself? Although Luo Fan had self-destructed, his life essence was still there. With a single thought, endless power was generated to rebuild his body. With a step, he walked out of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court and stood in front of the figure again. "Let go. Your nature has determined that you can't do anything to me," Luo Fan said faintly. "You deserve to die 10,000 times for your sins," the figure said with an extremely vague and hollow voice. This voice was not the voice of a sage, because it did not contain the eternal and inextinguishable charm of a sage's voice. Instead, it was the voice of the world. It was the voice of the world's will. What it contained was a sense of almighty apathy, a kind of apathy that was completely devoid of any emotion. It raised its hand and squeezed. The crystal ball in its hand dissipated. Then, it raised its hand and grabbed at Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan felt it. He was rejected by the entire universe. A completely irresistible power suddenly acted on his body. It acted on his life essence, trying to imprison him. The moment he felt this change, Luo Fan did not hesitate to activate all the power that made up his body and self-destructed. The power of this self-destruction directly broke through the layers of barriers. It once again poured into the space-time world on the surface, directly destroying the space-time that had just been restored and dissipating at an even faster speed than before. It directly minced the vast space-time and completely destroyed all the rules and laws within that area. Soon, it once again spread to the area with stars, and it was about to include those areas in this power. It completely destroyed them. Seeing this, the figure had no choice but to stop. It could only raise its hand again and collect the endless power. It once again turned into a crystal ball in its hand. Then, Luo Fan's figure once again walked out of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. At this moment, there was a faint smile on his face. Just as he had said, Although this figure was formed from the aura of a saint and was so powerful that he could not defend against it, the root of its existence was that its weakness was so obvious and easy to exploit. It could no longer deal with Luo Fan. As long as Luo Fan purposefully made himself self-destruct every time the figure was about to attack him, destroying the space-time of this world and the planets in this world, the figure would have no choice but to stop and no longer be able to hurt him. At this moment, the figure quietly floated above the path. It did not attack Luo Fan, nor did it disperse. It seemed to be thinking hard, trying to find a way out of this predicament. Seeing this, Luo Fan did not stand on ceremony. He raised his hand and waved. In an instant, the holy decree that was left behind by the destruction of the Venerable One fell into his hand. During this process, the figure formed by the aura of a sage did not move at all. It was as if Luo Fan's action was as normal as him scratching an itch. It was obvious that he did not care about the holy decree at all. This was normal. Although the figure looked extremely powerful, it was only formed by the aura of a sage summoned by the heavenly punishment. Its existence would only last as long as the heavenly punishment existed. As long as the heavenly punishment passed, it would naturally disappear. In this way, there was no need for him to collect any treasures. Moreover, as a figure formed by the aura of a sage, the aura he emitted was countless times purer than the holy decree. How could it possibly be interested in the holy decree? After Luo Fan raised his hand to hold the holy decree, he sensed that it was different from the holy decree he had obtained in the demon realm. This holy decree contained more karma intent, and it had a closer connection with the River of Luck. In a trance, Luo Fan even felt that it came from the River of Luck and belonged to a part of it. He knew that this was the reason why the Venerable One's cultivation path was different from any of the Venerables he had encountered in the demon realm. He casually threw it into the divine court heavenly cauldron, causing it to vibrate in joy. After completing this step, he looked at the figure, who seemed to still be deep in thought. After thinking for a while, he smiled and raised his hand to release an endless amount of power into the great path. He poured it into the point that he had found with the help of the merit of heaven and earth at the very beginning. As he poured his power into it, the figure formed by the aura of a sage shuddered slightly. The featureless face turned to face Luo Fan, and Luo Fan vaguely felt like it was staring at him. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that what he had done was effective. Therefore, he increased his efforts to create power out of thin air and poured it into that spot. He used that portion of the great path to transfer this power to the outside world, gradually bringing more and more benefits to the world, and slowly offsetting the sins that he and the Venerable One had done for the world. This great path was extremely mysterious and profound. Previously, when Luo Fan had self-destructed twice, the intense destructive power had impacted the great path. However, it did not cause too many changes, and it could not even make it cave in. But now, when he poured his power into that spot, it faintly caused the great path to tremble inexplicably. Faintly, it caused the great path to emit a sense of intimacy toward Luo Fan after a long time. The figure formed by the aura of a sage, who was quietly watching Luo Fan from above the void, gradually became illusory. It was about to disappear. At the very last moment, the figure raised its hand and pointed, and a strange flame suddenly wrapped around Luo Fan's body. The flame burned fiercely and enveloped Luo Fan's entire body, but it did not have any temperature. It did not even harm a single hair on Luo Fan's body. However, under the cover of the flame, Luo Fan felt an indescribable pressure. The rejection and suppression of the world against him became stronger and more terrifying. This is the karmic fire of heaven and earth. Luo Fan looked at the flames around him and understood its nature. He couldn't help but sigh when he understood its nature. At this moment, the silhouette of the man finally dissipated slowly, leaving no trace of him behind. It was as if it had never appeared. Although Luo Fan did not gain much from fighting with the figure formed by the aura of a sage, and he did not really see anything that could help him comprehend many mysteries, it allowed him to truly understand what kind of existence a sage was. A real sage, even if it was a creature formed by the aura of a sage, was not something he had seen before. What imprint of a sage, what shadow of a sage, and what aura of a sage could compare to? As for the imprint of a sage, the shadow of a sage, and the aura of a sage, because they did not have any spirituality, they did not know how to restrain themselves. All of their mysteries were vividly displayed, allowing anyone to feel that they were extraordinary and use their own ability to comprehend the way of a sage contained within them. However, a real sage would definitely not do that. A real sage had perfect control over everything about himself. If he was unwilling, anyone could see him with their own eyes. They would not be able to sense anything special about him, and they would not be able to comprehend any mysteries from him. Even the imprint of a sage might not be produced. When he realized this, Luo Fan was shocked at first, but after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it made sense. Even he could prevent others from condensing the fake sage imprint that they would normally condense after seeing him in a flawless state. A sage was billions of times stronger than him, so how could he not be able to do the same thing? The karmic fire of heaven and earth around Luo Fan was formed from the sins that Luo Fan had previously created for this world. After it appeared, it continuously burned Luo Fan's life essence and continuously harmed his body. Although it did not bring him any pain, it allowed him to clearly feel that he was continuously weakening as time passed, and that he was continuously being damaged. There was only one way to resolve the karmic fire of heaven and earth, and that was to make meritorious deeds for this world and bring benefits to it. Through these benefits and meritorious deeds, he could offset the karmic fire of heaven and earth. This was obviously the final struggle of the heavenly punishment. If he could not neutralize the sins that he had created before the karmic fire of heaven and earth really hurt his foundation, what awaited him would be an irreparable consequence. After understanding this, Luo Fan naturally did not dare to be negligent. He raised his hand and waved the sky-splitting axe. The sky-splitting axe that had been fixed in mid-air turned into sky-splitting child and landed beside him. He said, "Greetings, Master. Come and help me. Pour the power of creation into the place I point at," Luo Fan said concisely. Hearing this, sky-splitting child hurriedly said, "Yes, Master." As he spoke, he did not dare to hesitate. He pointed his hands at the location of the great path in the distance, and endless power was born from it. It was frantically poured into the great path to help Luo Fan offset the sins that he had created. As a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure, the sky-splitting axe could easily open up an endless world. It was really easy for it to produce power out of thin air. At this moment, the power of the great path that it poured in was even several times more than the power that Luo Fan poured in. As the power poured in, the endless karmic fire of heaven and earth around Luo Fan began to dim at an extremely slow speed. This obviously meant that Luo Fan's choice was correct, and it was an effective way to eliminate the karmic fire of heaven and earth. At this point, Luo Fan finally heaved a sigh of relief. As for the creature formed by the aura of the sage, Luo Fan did not dare to relax at all. Even if he had used his last resort at the last moment, it was still the same. Only a fool would dare to treat anything related to a saint lightly. Luo Fan was obviously not a fool. Now, he had found a way to eliminate the last resort. Luo Fan relaxed. It was only natural. Although the creature formed by the aura of the sage has restrained all its specialties to the extreme. However, it's not like I didn't gain anything. At least, I've seen it make a few moves. After relaxing, Luo Fan began to count the gains this time. Previously, the means that the creature formed by the aura of the sage had used seemed to be extremely ordinary and ordinary body movements. However, judging from the terrifying effect that they could achieve, These seemingly ordinary body movements obviously contained mysteries beyond imagination that could not be comprehended by a sage. Although Luo Fan could not understand or even feel these mysteries at all. After all, he had seen them, and they had been deeply engraved in the depths of his memory. Now, he could not understand or feel them. However, at some special times, when he suddenly had a special understanding in a certain aspect, he would naturally be able to see and understand some of the principles. He would know some of the secrets of the sage's means. This could definitely be regarded as a huge gain. Thinking of this, the grievance that Luo Fan had suffered since he saw the creature formed by the aura of the sage suddenly disappeared. A smile gradually appeared on his face. The process of pouring power into the Great Way lasted for 3 years before it came to an end. It was not because the karmic fire on his body had been completely extinguished during these 3 years. In fact, after these 3 years, there was still a trace of extremely stubborn karmic fire burning on his life source, constantly hurting his life source. The reason why he stopped at this time was that the traces of karmic fire could no longer be offset and eliminated by pouring power into the Great Way. Half a year ago, all the karmic fire had weakened to its current state. However, in these 6 months, the power that he poured into the Great Way was originally enough to completely extinguish 1/5 of the karmic fire. However, it could not do anything to the traces of karmic fire. The karmic fire of heaven and earth didn't budge in the slightest. It burned stubbornly, burning away his life essence. This was completely different from what he had originally expected. He raised his hand and pointed at the heaven-splitting child. After turning him back into the heaven-splitting axe and putting away the universe in his sleeve, Luo Fan stopped pouring power into the Great Way. He thought to himself, could it be that I need to use merit to offset the last trace of karmic fire? Thinking of this, the merit seal of heaven and earth appeared in his hand. This merit seal looked exactly the same as 3 years ago. It did not change at all because of the loss of the merit seal of heaven and earth that was integrated into the Great Way. Of course, it did not grow because he had poured so much power into the world through the Great Way in the past 3 years. Looking at this merit seal, Luo Fan could not bear to send it to offset the traces of karmic fire. The merit seal of heaven and earth was too precious in this world. It could almost allow him to pry into the secrets of the saint. How could he lose it just like that? Moreover, more importantly, he was rather interested in the karmic fire. It should be known that the karmic fire was different from ordinary karmic fire. Ordinary karmic fire could not affect the current Luo Fan at all. He could easily get rid of it and eliminate it. On the other hand, he could only act according to the rules of this world and utilize methods that ordinary people could utilize in order to neutralize the karmic flames of the heavens and the earth. If he was able to completely comprehend the profundities of such a miraculous existence, then it was obvious how great the benefits would be.